Everyone to the channel. Today we're diving into an intense new what if scenario in the Naruto universe. What if Team 7 refused to accept their losses? Imagine a world where Sakura and Sasuke are left grappling with the immense pain of friends and mentors. With only 3 members left, they embark on a mission fueled by determination to heal their past and bring back those they lost. But before we jump into this gripping tale, I'd love your support. My goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I can't do it without you. If you're passionate about Naruto and enjoy exploring the depths of Team 7's journey, give this and share your thoughts. Upright, wide-eyed, before breaking into a smile. It worked. She mirror on the back of the door. Ugh. The first thing to go would be the ridiculously long hair. She wasn't waiting until the Chunin exams to cut it. She moved to her desk, cluttered with scrolls and books, and found her calendar. A sigh of relief escaped her as she checked the date. October 10th. That was both good and bad. Good because they had over a year until graduation, but bad because it meant Naruto would wake up on his birthday in a village that still hated and feared him. Still, as much as she wanted to rush to his apartment, she couldn't. Sakura and got dressed, glad it was a free day. She planned to start making the necessary changes before her parents woke up. She couldn't do everything at once. It would be too drastic and draw too much attention. Just like Naruto and Sasuke would have to change slowly. Even though they faced a lot more scrutiny than she did, she grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl as she left the house, promising herself she'd get something better later. No more dieting. She made her way through the streets, pushing down the shock of seeing other people, ignoring the pain and grief around her. She would focus on her mission and deal with everything else once they were together. She entered the store she'd been looking for and began browsing. She had loved her dress the first time around, but it hadn't been practical. After starting her training with Tsunade, her clothing choices had become much more functional, so she looked for something similar. She quickly found a red top and black shorts, but she couldn't locate an apron skirt or the elbow protectors she preferred. Fingerless gloves were easy to find, but they would need a lot of reinforcement to withstand her full strength. For protection, full gloves were better, but she had class and it would be tougher to train in them since her body wasn't used to the thicker fabric. She picked up new black shinobi sandals, not the heel boots. Those would look a mess by cutting her hair with a kunai this time. Sasuke blinked and activated his Sharingan to ensure it was real. It was. Sitting up, he saw everything just as he remembered. He made his way to the window and Uchiha district, which needed fixing. He wanted them to have a proper home, not just a crumbling memory. It didn't take long for him to realize when he was, his hands clenching into fists, and then he froze. Sasuke had known this academically, of course, but seeing them was different. He had gotten used to only having one arm, and he had been foolish to think they had her, and she could do nothing. His arm hadn't prevented her from being sealed away. It had been too late to stop what was happening, but he had survived, thanks to Sakura. Unfortunately, it was too late for the world when they sealed her. The damage had been too severe. Too many had died while in the Shinju. Well, death would have been better than what that thing did to them. He shook his head. That was all in the past, or the future. It wouldn't happen this time. They would stop it. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes, reaching out to feel them. A soft smile crossed his face as he sensed Sakura moving to leave her home and felt Naruto still asleep in his apartment. He chuckled. Of course, since the academy wasn't open today, he had work to do. After getting dressed and having breakfast, he dug out the cleaning and gardening equipment. He could feel his Umbuguard's amusement and confusion as he went on a cleaning spree. Too bad he didn't dare use any Kage Bunshin with them around. If he had a guard, then Naruto would have one too. They had had them until they graduated, making things more complicated. At least cleaning was giving him some physical training. He'd been good at this age, especially compared to his peers, but he needed to be even better. They all did, not just their team, but everyone. Getting the other teams up to speed wouldn't be easy, especially Shikamaru's, since he was too content to do the bare minimum, and the other two weren't any better. In fact, Ino was in some ways worse than Sakura had been at this age the first time around. Honestly, he just wanted it to be tomorrow so he could see Sakura and Naruto, making sure they had really all made it back. He wouldn't put it past Naruto to have used everything he had to send them back so far at the cost of not coming back himself. He wouldn't have told them either because he would have known they would say no. He didn't think he'd seen that kind of nervousness or sadness in Naruto before they activated it, but Naruto had gotten much better at hiding things over the years. Maybe he should, accidentally, run into Naruto later to see if it was really their Naruto, but it was his birthday. No, Naruto wouldn't be going anywhere. Could he come up with a reason to go to his apartment and explain how he knew where it was? Sakura wandered into the park and sat down out of sight, leaning against a tree. She felt so much better without the weight of her hair dragging down her back. She dreaded going home and facing her mom's reaction to her haircut, not to mention her more practical ninja clothing. Her parents wanted a lady, not a shinobi, but she couldn't give them that. Maybe her closeness to Sasuke would make them a little happier? They wouldn't like her closeness to Naruto, but she didn't care. She'd be moving out as soon as possible anyway. She felt movement and tensed without seeming to move. Then she relaxed and turned her head to see Sasuke staring at her, dark eyes taking her in, searching for something. She smiled softly. Sasuke. She reached out her hand, and he relaxed. Threw her arms around him, grinning when he hugged her back, tugging on her newly cut hair. Needed a change? He teased. It felt too weird long, but at least I got a proper cut this time. She laughed. What about your guards? Ditch them. He shrugged. I had to see one of you, and there's no way to explain my showing up at Naruto's apartment to his guards. When I realized you were here alone, I had to see you, sap, she whispered, closing her eyes as he kissed her forehead. I hate not being able to go to him, especially today, she admitted, shifting to rest against his side as he wrapped his arms around her. That would take some getting used to, but she wouldn't complain. This time he wouldn't be losing an arm. She'd kick his ass if he did, and she knew Naruto would be right there with her. Sakura felt Sasuke tense slightly and looked up at him. What is it? We're back further than planned, he murmured, lowering his voice even more. Naruto did say it wasn't exact. Why was he so worried? No. You don't think, Naruto? It's something he'd do, Sasuke admitted, and we won't know until tomorrow, will we? We'll be in class. We'll know if it's our Naruto or not. We will, she told him, determined to believe that. Surely he would give them a sign. Sasuke sighed and held her close. It felt good, but not quite like it used to. Their bodies were different now, not the way they had been in the future. She was too skinny, lacking muscle, and they were both shorter. He had both arms, and they were only 11, which meant they didn't have the hormones to make this feel how it should. Still, she felt safe in his embrace. Tomorrow. She shivered and pressed closer to Sasuke, feeling him tighten his grip and kiss the top of her head. How could they hide this? She couldn't just stop all her fangirl behavior without reason, especially considering the changes she had made to her appearance. She was just grateful her seal hadn't returned with her, or had it. She could feel her chakra reserves were larger than they had been last time, but was her control as perfect? She might just need to refill the seal with chakra for it to reappear. She needed it for the Chunin exams if they wanted to take down Orochimaru. But if Sasuke and Naruto were anywhere near their future levels, they could handle him alone, let alone together. And how would she explain it, or many of her skills, without being Tsunade's apprentice? She wished they didn't have to be so careful in their own home. But there were dangers even within the walls of Konoha. It had only been after Sasuke killed him that the truth about everything Danzo had done over the years began to surface. They needed time to figure out what they brought back, to train their younger bodies to use it. Drawing Danzo's attention too soon could spell disaster. They needed Naruto to come up with a way to counter the seal he'd used on his rude agents. Then Yamato could share everything he knew about the organization. Surely with that, the Sandaime would act. If he didn't, they might have to bring in the Godaime sooner than planned. It would mean a lot to Shino and others if they could expose the organization and free those trapped in it. Would Sai be as damaged at this age as he had been when he was placed on their team? Had Shin died yet? Could they save Sai's brother? I can hear you thinking, Sasuke murmured. Rude. She breathed back, and he nodded in understanding. All their plans for the organization hinged on Naruto having come with them. Sasuke was reluctant to let go, to leave her side, but he had to. It wasn't safe to evade his Umbu guard for too long. He couldn't risk raising their suspicions so soon. No matter how much Naruto had once looked up to the Sandaime, he had done too many questionable things over the years for Sasuke to trust him, and Umbu answered to him. Besides, there was probably at least one root member in his guard, and the last thing he needed was Danzo breathing down his neck. How easy would it be for the man to make him disappear into root at this point? Arranging a training accident wouldn't be too difficult, and Sasuke wasn't sure he could escape on his own. Yes, his eyes had come back with him, but could he keep them active long enough for a fight? Could his current body handle that level of stress? He didn't think so. He knew Naruto and Sakura would come for him, just as they would for Naruto if Danzo targeted him. But Naruto would be much harder to capture and hold on to, thanks to Kurama, and he'd cause a massive scene if he had to rescue Sasuke too. That would be one way to reveal the bastard. In the end, he pressed a final kiss to her forehead and slipped away, wandering the streets aimlessly. He hid a smirk when he sensed his guard's relief at finding him. He did some shopping. The kitchen was bare, and while he had mentally adjusted to surviving on almost nothing, his growing body needed proper nutrition. So did all three of them. The sooner he and Naruto could start building a friendlier relationship, the better, and then he could start bringing lunch for the blonde too. He honestly didn't understand Naruto's unwavering loyalty to Konoha. Not after everything he had endured and all the secrets that had come to light during their teenage years. His own loyalty lay with certain people, some in Konoha and some in other villages. He hadn't loved the village since the massacre. He wondered if they'd be better off outside Konoha, perhaps looking into rebuilding Uzushiogakure and reaching out to those the villages had wronged last time, like the other Jinchu. Then again, that could spark a war. Together though, they could fend off Akatsuki more easily. He finished his shopping, fighting the urge to turn toward the streets that led to Naruto. How had he never pieced together what people were saying to realize Naruto's secret? They weren't exactly subtle about it, at least not today. He was grateful that he hadn't attended the celebrations since his family had died. The thought of going now made him feel sick. He had to be patient and wait until tomorrow to see Naruto. He had to. Sasuke forced himself to walk back to the Uchiha compound, where he put away everything he had bought before starting to cook simple, filling, and nutritious meals that could last for days. That way, he'd only have to add extras later, saving time. He checked to make sure he had everything for class the next day, finding several mistakes in his homework and hesitating over whether to fix them. He had been top of the class, yes, but even he hadn't been perfect. Sakura's test scores had actually been better in theory. He'd ranked first because of the combination of all his scores. Should he even out those scores? Naruto's grades could improve without affecting his standing since he had been so far behind in his theory work the first time around. It had shocked him the first time they had to submit a written mission report after the Wave mission, seeing how much Naruto had struggled with it. For once, he hadn't insulted or teased Naruto over it. He had helped instead. It wouldn't be like that this time. If Naruto hadn't come, they would find a way to tutor him before graduation. In the end, he sat down to redo his work, ignoring the sound of fireworks going off in the village. Kurama's ceiling wasn't something to celebrate. It just made him easier for Akatsuki to capture if things had gone their way. He figured that was why they had all been sealed away in the first place. Whispers from Zetsu to make his job easier. If Hashirama hadn't captured, sealed, and then handed several of them off to the other villages, they would have been much harder for Akatsuki to grab. It didn't take him long to redo his homework, and then he had dinner before going to bed to toss and turn. His mind was racing with too many thoughts, hopes, and fears to find sleep easily. "Welcome, what have you done?" Sakura didn't flinch as she met her mom's gaze, slipping out of her shoes and taking a deep breath. It was a relief when her dad appeared. He was the more accepting of the two. He had been a chunin once, after all, but that was also why he hadn't wanted her to be a shinobi. Her mom, on the other hand, "It's just a haircut, Mom. It was too heavy and giving me headaches." And that wasn't a lie. She had just put up with it the first time to get Sasuke's attention. Pity she hadn't known then that Sasuke preferred her hair short. "And your clothes?" her mom demanded. Sakura was thankful she had her story ready. She put on a smile as she gushed about a group of older girls who had graduated 2 years ago, pretending to be upset when she spoke of their teasing but then explaining how they had told her how a real kunoichi should dress and how clan boys like Sasuke-kun would be more impressed with her looking the part, even as a student. "I couldn't find an apron skirt I liked, but isn't this top cute?" she grinned. Needless to say, dinner was a bit uncomfortable that night, but there was no more mention of her changes in clothes or hairstyle. Sasuke dressed in his usual outfit, forcing himself not to stare at his reflection. It had been a long time since he'd worn it or kept his hair so short. He taped his lower legs and strapped on his kunai holster before grabbing the small bag with his lunch and homework. He locked the house and started making his way toward the academy, forcing himself to act disinterested in everything, trying to keep his heart from racing in anticipation and fear. It had been so long since he'd been in Konoha, but somehow he still remembered where everything was, not like he had ever memorized the layout with the Sharingan. After all, he made it to the academy and went to their classroom. Which seat was his? One of the window seats. He picked one toward the middle, where people sat behind and in front of him, making it the safest choice. He fought the urge to freeze as Naruto walked into the room, forcing himself not to stare. Naruto was early. Was he ever this early? His heart pounded, and he couldn't control his reaction at the sight of Naruto, so short and dressed in that awful oversized jumpsuit. He lifted his gaze, and their eyes locked, bright blue meeting dark. Naruto ambled his way over, hands shoved in his pockets, hiding his shaking. He sat down in front of Sasuke, slumping down, but then he started fidgeting, tapping his pencil. Sasuke relaxed when he realized the blonde was waiting for him to speak. "What's the plan?" he asked. Naruto turned around, mouth open. "I thought you were going to say something first. You know, like a plan for today, more like a way to keep from getting caught." Sasuke muttered back, glancing around the room. "Caught? What do you mean? There's no one here that could hurt us," Naruto insisted. Sasuke gave him a flat look. "You haven't been here long enough. You think Danzo is just going to sit back and let us move forward without doing something? What can he do?" Naruto scoffed, not realizing how often they had to keep that information hidden. Sasuke sighed. "I'm not saying we don't fight back. I'm just saying we need to keep our heads down and play our cards right." Blue eyes snapped open as he gasped, instinctively trying to curl into a ball. It hurt. Why did it hurt? Something meant to. He pulled himself up, summoning the seal from muscle memory rather than conscious thought, activating it just before he let out a scream, writhing in agony. He was burning. He felt like he was on fire. "Naruto, protect them!" The familiar voice echoed from deep within him. He screamed as crimson energy erupted from his body. Outside, the night was still. The seal contained all noise and chakra, shielding the chaos inside the small apartment from anyone outside. The seal had been powerful enough to fool a goddess, keeping even the most perceptive villagers, 2 of whom would soon wake and knew him best, from sensing anything amiss. He groaned, slowly pushing himself up, glancing around in confusion until recognition set in. He'd done it. Their last-ditch crazy plan had worked. His apartment had been destroyed during Pain's attack after all. Lifting his hands, he noticed how small they were, tipped with sharp claws. He staggered to the bathroom, staring at his reflection in despair. It took barely a thought to twist his appearance back to what it had been, even as he desperately reached out with his mind, only to be met with utter silence. Naruto shakily lifted his shirt to check where the seal should be, but there was nothing but unmarked skin. Kurama was gone. The strongest of the Biju, Naruto's oldest companion. He closed his eyes in grief. They really were one now. Naruto was as close to being a 9-tailed Biju as anyone could get. Was his chakra different enough to derail Zetsu's plans? He leaned on the sink, forcing himself to take slow, deep breaths. He had to get going, figure out when he was, find the others, and then he froze as a familiar chakra signature appeared outside his apartment. Oh, he wasn't sure he was ready to face him, but it looked like he didn't have a choice. Leaving the bathroom, he grimaced when he spotted the calendar. Great. Could they have appeared brightly at him? But it didn't have the usual warmth. Happy birthday, not. That had been harder than he thought it would be. He still loved the old man, but it was tempered by everything he'd learned after the man had been dead for years. He'd made so many mistakes others had paid for, like Itachi, Sasuke, and Naruto himself. He should never have taken back the hat after the Yondaime died, but there hadn't been another real contender. Kakashi Sensei had been too young and consumed by grief. Ero-Sennin was a flat-out no, and Bachan hadn't been near the village in years. The only other real option would have been Danzo, and that would have been a total disaster for Konoha and the rest of the world. Just the thought of that man having any real say in his life and training made him feel sick. What he would have done to the shinobi forces. Compared to that, the Sandaime had done a wonderful job. Still, the sooner Tsunade could take the hat, the better. It didn't help that he was struggling to ensure he felt like he should at this age. He couldn't let anyone sense anything other than a regular preteen. He had to figure that out, or else as soon as he left his apartment, everyone would know he wasn't the Naruto of this time. And he knew exactly what they'd think, that the seal had broken and Kurama had taken him over. He really didn't need to deal with that. So it looked like he had a new seal to design and only a few hours to do it. He had to make it work. He picked up the calendar and realized they'd gone back further than he thought, which explained why he was gone now. It didn't make the loss hurt any less though. Even having the current Kurama with him would have been better. He could have befriended him again. He hadn't told the others it was a possibility, and doubted it would take long for Sasuke to realize, especially when the sage's chakra was gone. Was it gone because he was no longer human? Or at least not fully? He wasn't entirely sure what he was now, and how would Sasuke and Sakura handle that? Kind of fitting that it happened on his birthday, he guessed. He could hear the people outside, celebrating, feel their joy and the hate directed at his apartment. It hurt. After everything, after years of being their hero, to return to this, he hadn't really realized how bad it would be. He shivered, curling up, but then he clenched his teeth. He would face it and accept it for now. He knew he could change it over time. He would prove he wasn't a monster, even if he looked the part now. Naruto got up and carefully began inscribing seals around his apartment. He knew Sasuke wanted them to live with him, but they couldn't yet. Until then, he needed a safe place to stay. It wouldn't be as bad once he joined the academy, but there were still break-ins, graffiti, broken windows, things like that. He was grateful for the new kunai set from the Sandaime for his birthday, smiling when he found a small gift of ninja wire and a new pair of sandals. He knew now it was from Kakashi Sensei. His sensei hadn't been able or really mentally ready to be close to him even when he was a genin, but he'd always left gifts or money when it was needed. He took out his equipment and grimaced at its condition and how little he had. He was still at the academy, so he didn't have access to the better gear stores he would after graduation. Still, he knew how to improvise weapons if necessary, but it shouldn't come to that, hopefully. It depended on when they ended up going after Danzo, he guessed. They hadn't made a firm timetable for a lot of things since they hadn't been sure when they would land. He was glad they had an extra year and that they hadn't appeared after Sasuke had received the seal or, worse, abandoned the village. He nearly flinched when the fireworks began, not used to explosions being anything but very bad anymore. Not that he'd ever felt great about them anyway, considering they were used on his birthday, which had never been a good day for him. He just wanted to see Sakura and Sasuke. He'd felt their presence in the village and even sensed them together at one point, so he was 99.5% sure they'd come back too. The first time around, Sasuke would have bolted rather than spend time with a fangirl. Any other day, he would have met up with them too, but he couldn't, not on the day of the festival for the defeat of the Kyuubi. The academy tomorrow meant seeing all the other rookies, Irika and Mizuki, that treacherous creep. He was changing that. There was no way he was letting that man use him to steal anything. He'd pass on his own this time, thank you very much. Revealing him early wouldn't change much, except maybe giving them a more competent teacher. Irika was definitely miles ahead of him in teaching ability, And not just when it came to Naruto. Most of the civilian kids had been treated poorly by Mizuki. It would take a while to come up with a plan, but until then, well, it would look strange if he suddenly stopped pranking people. Instant ramen for dinner was no fun, and he now fully understood how bad it was for him. But it still beat what he'd been able to scrounge the last few years when he often went hungry. The stuff at Ichiraku's was better since it was fresh and had a lot more ingredients, but he still shouldn't rely on it. Sadly, his stipend only went so far, and the local grocers liked to sabotage his purchases. The markets were often better since they brought in traveling sellers, but he couldn't always make it there. He spent some time cleaning up the apartment, grimacing when he looked at his old orange jumpsuit. How had he survived wearing that garish orange for so long? Then again, he had been able to hide from even Umbu while wearing it, so he'd gotten some good stealth training out of it. Still, he preferred the clothes he'd adopted after they sealed Kagaya, when they thought it was all over. He loved orange, but not the bright shade of his jumpsuit, and not all over. Still, he didn't have anything else appropriate, so he was stuck with it, even as he wondered if the others would have made any changes. Hiruzen smiled at the crowd as he made his way to the podium to give his usual speech. He'd much rather be with his family or Naruto, although his successor deserved the praise given every year. Not everyone could seal one of the 9 Biju in the way he had, and they would have long-lasting effects on the young generation. He also wouldn't let he would continue supporting him. After all, this was the boy who carried the weight of a village and a Biju on his shoulders without complaint. It was the least he could do. The next step would be ensuring that he could handle his training, the academy, and help out with missions. They had a bright future ahead of them, but first, they needed to survive tonight. Naruto, protect them. Kurama's voice echoed in his mind. I will. The moment Naruto stepped outside, he felt the warmth of the sun against his skin. It was nice. The air smelled like a hint of rain, but he would take that over the smell of smoke and ash that lingered in his old home. Everything seemed so new. The village felt alive and vibrant with color, but the moment he stepped into the village square, his stomach dropped. Stares. Hushed whispers. They saw him as nothing but the Kyuubi. He kept his chin high as he walked down the street. He would show them. He would change their minds. He would prove he was more than the monster they thought he was. And even if Kurama was gone, he would carry on his legacy. He would never forget the lessons learned through pain and loss. Naruto took a deep breath and smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage. He was not alone. He had his friends, and together they would overcome any obstacles. I'll prove to them I'm not just the Nine Tails. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, he declared, determination shining in his blue eyes as he set off to find Sakura and Sasuke. The future looked brighter than ever. He walked into the room and fought the urge to freeze or stare. Sasuke was already there in the window seat, but there was no sign of Sakura or Ino. There was Shikamaru, Kiba, Hinata. Ouch, he would have to deal with that soon. He didn't want her wasting so much on him when he never returned her feelings the way she wanted. He would still help her stand up to her clan, though, for her and Niji's sake. Niji, who needed his own reality check, and getting the seal removed should help with that. Naruto walked over to the seat in front of Sasuke and slumped into it, fighting the urge to look back at him. He looked just like he expected, no changes, and that had his heart in his throat. But Sasuke's wardrobe had been almost as limited as his own, so maybe. He picked up his pencil and started tapping it absently, hoping, when a familiar rhythm of a sandaled foot tapped his lower back. It was him. He bit his lip to suppress a grin or a cry of triumph. 1 down, 1 2. Take that, Ino pig! Sakura cheered from the doorway, and Naruto spun to face her, knowing it wouldn't make anyone pay attention to him since his crush on her was well known, even as Sasuke's foot nudged him again. There wasn't a second of hesitation or doubt in his mind that it was their Sakura walking over, taking the seat beside Sasuke, not dressed like that and with her hair freshly cut. They'd really done it. All 3 of them were back in time to save the world. Sakura slipped away from the other girls during the break, finding Naruto behind the bushes and wrapping her arms around him immediately. His arms came up to embrace her in return. Sakura-chan, he whispered, holding on tight. We were so worried about you. We thought, when we realized how far back, you thought I sacrificed myself to do it. He finished for her just as Sasuke slipped into their little hideaway. He rested a hand on her shoulder and the other on the back of Naruto's neck, and the three of them sat in silence for a few moments. "Are you to blame for Mizuki-sensei not being here today?" Sasuke eventually asked, and Naruto's grin looked rather feral. "Not like the traitor doesn't deserve it." Naruto shrugged without dislodging them. "Can we meet up after school? With how mad Mom is at me over my image change, I can stay out to keep clear. Training ground 44? She asked with a grin, and her boys groaned but nodded. It would be the safest spot from other shinobi, and hey, good training and a way to see just how much they had lost. "Happy belated birthday," she said, kissing his cheek. "HNN. Sasuke agreed, smirking slightly before brushing a kiss against Naruto's lips. She giggled, and they both looked at her. "Don't you remember your first kiss?" she teased. "Well, that's one way to get them to back off." Sasuke chuckled. "And try to beat me to death." Naruto groaned. "At least I only have one fan, and she's much more polite." "Right, we need to work on Hinata's confidence so that when Gaara arrives for the exams, he will notice her a lot sooner." "Right, because she needs him in his psychopath stage noticing her." Sasuke stared at her. "Well, no, not then. Besides, Naruto will hit him back to sanity soon enough, or I could just tag him with a better seal from the start." Naruto pointed out. "Let him get some sleep before the exams, and he'll be in a much better place." They planned to stop the Fourth Shinobi War before it could ever start. This time, Zetsu would be dealt with for good, no comebacks. Hinata wouldn't hold the dying Gaara in her arms a year after they had begun dating, just days before Naruto had admitted he was going to propose. They'd been so cute together, and a marriage between the Hyuga heiress and the Kazekage would have been a wonderful way to tie their villages even closer together. So many families and loved ones had been torn apart as the world crumbled around them, but this time they would have the chance to live happy, long lives. "See you after class?" she murmured before leaving to rejoin the other girls. Sasuke lingered, studying Naruto, who couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked softly, reaching out to cup his cheek, enjoying that he could now that his arm was back. He felt Naruto lean into the touch, but then he pulled away. "We gotta get back to class." Sasuke watched him vanish with a frown. What was he hiding? Why? It had been a long time since Naruto had tried to hide something from them. They had no secrets from each other. Had something gone wrong? But how could it? The three of them were there, memories intact. Yeah, they'd have to train, but they had always expected that since there was no way their younger bodies could handle the power they had as adults. He slipped out of the trees and back to the classroom, worried. Iruka's gaze slid to Naruto as he handed back last week's test results. Mizuki had finally shown up during the break, incandescent with rage and barely coherent. He blamed Naruto, but Iruka wasn't so sure. Naruto's pranks weren't usually that nasty. What had Mizuki done to become the target of Naruto's anger? There was always a reason for targeted pranks. Iruka had suffered several when he first became the class teacher until he came to see Naruto as another student, one very much like he'd once been. Still, he'd asked Sensei to have Mizuki work with her class for the rest of the day, keeping him and Naruto far apart to let tempers cool. Other than that, the day had been rather quiet. He was surprised by that, but Sakura hadn't argued with Ino except for when they first arrived in class, and Sasuke hadn't even twitched when Sakura sat beside him or Naruto in front of him. He hoped that was a good sign. The way he had cut himself off from everyone after the massacre worried Iruka. It was understandable but very unhealthy. It would be dangerous once he graduated and was placed on a team. If Sasuke was beginning to come out of his shell, then Iruka would do everything he could to ensure he felt safe doing so. If he was accepting Sakura and Naruto, then he would make sure they were the ones he kept close. He didn't care what anyone said about the two boys being near each other or those stupid rumors after the Kyuubi attack. He'd known several Uchihas, had taught even more. They would never have set the fox on the village. Naruto made it to the place where they had first faced Orochimaru and sat down to meditate, working on his sensing. He could almost feel the seal on his stomach, but it was just in his head. He'd placed the newly created seal there since people expected him to have one on his stomach, and at first glance, it could be mistaken for the original, but only at first glance. Deep in the forest, he would have to turn it off soon, and remove the hinge, though it wasn't really a hinge, more of a shape shift. That was a bit creepy. Yeah, his transformations had always been a bit more solid than others, But this was on a whole other level. He sensed Sasuke enter the forest, knowing he was worried about him, and stayed where he was, waiting. Sasuke fought not to pant as he dropped down a few feet from where Naruto was sitting, meditating by the looks of it. His physical conditioning might be good among his classmates, but it was horrendous compared to even when they first entered this forest so long ago. He waited to catch his breath and then moved to sit opposite Naruto, knowing he knew he was there. It was another 10 minutes before Sakura joined them, looking worse than he did, even wobbling slightly when she landed. Then she dropped across their laps, and Naruto finally opened his eyes in response. "Sakura-chan," he complained. "You're comfier than the ground," she replied. Sasuke couldn't help but smile at the banter, resting his hand on her thigh. Maybe the forest hadn't been the best idea as a meeting point, but they needed the assured privacy it offered. He was tired enough from the trip, but Sakura's chakra levels at this age were minuscule for a shinobi, and even boosted, they were still very low. Naruto reached out to stroke her hair. "Nice cut, thanks." She smiled brightly at him. "I think it suits Akunoichi so much better than that old mess. It frames your face," Sasuke offered, and she blinked at him before smiling at him. He still wasn't the best with emotions, especially showing them, but he tried harder for them. His gaze moved up to Naruto, who was hesitant in the way he was stroking her pink locks. "Naruto, what is it?" he asked, working to soften his voice. He was shocked when Naruto flinched slightly, getting Sakura's attention as she sat up. "Naruto?" She reached out to him, and to both of their shock, Naruto stood up, moving away, arms wrapped around his stomach. "Naruto?" Sasuke called in alarm, shifting to stand before him, using a hand to try to gently lift his chin, but he was met with a frantic shake of his head. "I can't. I won't hurt you." He moved back, desperately trying to escape, but Sasuke wasn't about to let him go. He reached out to grab Naruto's shoulder and froze when Naruto jerked away, biting his lip hard enough to draw blood. Sasuke's heart dropped, horrified at the sight of him. He swallowed and stepped back, keeping his arms at his sides but not willing to back down either. "Naruto, what are you afraid of? You're not going to hurt us. You're our best friend. You're not a monster." Naruto stood there, eyes darting between the two of them, and Sasuke could see him working on something, desperately trying to find a way to fight through whatever darkness had invaded his head, but it was like it was holding him back. It hurt. He wanted nothing more than to reach out and hug him tightly. He would save him from himself if that's what it took, but all he could do was wait. So he stood still and silently pleaded for his friend to come back to him. Sakura was staring back and forth between them, feeling helpless as Naruto's breaths grew ragged. She couldn't just sit there. "Naruto, listen to me. I know you can hear me. Whatever happened then, it won't happen again. We're here now. We're all together, and we're going to fix this together." She reached out slowly, careful to keep her hands visible, and touched his arm. "You're not alone anymore. We're all in this together. Remember our promise?" That seemed to penetrate through. Naruto blinked slowly at her, and she felt a rush of hope. "The promise we made to protect each other, remember?" He opened his mouth but then swallowed hard, shaking his head again. "It's gone," he choked out. I can't keep it. I'm sorry." "No," she insisted, her voice rising. "You have to believe in us. You can do this. You can be free. You're strong enough to fight it." She watched him close his eyes, fighting something she couldn't see. "Naruto." Sasuke stepped back into view, catching his gaze. "You have to trust us. If you won't let go, then we will do it for you. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Slowly, as if a dam was breaking, Naruto's eyes filled with tears, and he fell to his knees. I can't keep this up," he wailed, dropping his hands from his stomach and allowing Sakura to pull him into her arms as Sasuke crouched beside him. "It's okay," she cooed softly, rocking him gently. "You don't have to do it alone. We're here, and we won't let you fall." Naruto cried for what felt like hours as they held him tightly, and Sasuke pressed his forehead against his shoulder, letting him know he would never leave him again. They would find a way to heal together. After a long while, he felt Naruto's breath even out beneath him, and the weight of despair seemed to ease, but it wouldn't disappear completely. They would have to face this again, but at least they had each other to lean on. It felt like a breakthrough, like the sun breaking through the clouds after a storm. "You'll always have us, Naruto," Sasuke murmured softly as he turned his head to kiss the top of his best friend's head. Naruto nodded, and they felt the warmth of hope flooding back to them. Sasuke smirked as Naruto gasped and writhed under him, his fingers dancing across tanned skin as Naruto tried to hold back his laughter. He was glad Naruto was still so ticklish despite the changes. He heard and sensed Sakura arrive, heard her giggling at them, and finally let Naruto up. He knew Naruto had let him pin him, could feel the strength in his muscles even as he held back. He'd always packed a punch, but now his strength was backed by inhuman power. He'd been working on his own strength training, but he knew he'd never match his teammates. He had always been the fast one on the team. Having fun without me? Sakura pouted, hands on her hips, and they didn't even need a glance at each other to be up and moving together, tackling her to the forest ground even as she laughed and tried to fight them off. Sasuke softening her landing. He wouldn't dare when they were older, but Sakura had a lot of work to get back to that level. So for now, they were overprotective. The three of them rolled around, shadow clones keeping a lookout to ensure they weren't found by animals or wandering shinobi. After all, Enko at least used the place to train and they couldn't risk being seen. Too many questions would be asked, and they had to keep those like Danzo in the dark. They couldn't go after that monster until their bodies could. Month they'd improved, but not enough to go after someone like him. Sakura could run up and down trees easily, even sit and meditate upside down on the bottom of branches. He and Naruto kept falling or blasting off, but they were getting higher. She'd begun using the river to practice water walking. They were weeks off that since they didn't focus solely on that one skill. Naruto could already use Kage Bunshin. They couldn't since he didn't have the control of his reserves, and Sakura lacked the reserves at this age, full stop. The sage's chakra had also messed what control he'd had the first time at this age up. He did wonder if he still had the Rinnegan, but so far only the Sharingan had activated. With Naruto no longer having the sage's chakra, they had to stop the war before Kaguya was brought into place, since it had needed both of them to seal her. Or was Naruto, being the reincarnation of Azura, enough for that? A lot of their more powerful abilities were useless too. They either lacked the power or control, or both for them, but more than that, they were often learned from others and would raise questions they couldn't answer. Chidori and the ways Sasuke could manipulate it, Naruto's Rasengan and the various types. Sakura's strength might be explainable since she'd done it to an extent instinctively before meeting Tsunade, but certain moves utilizing it, healing, and her seal had to be hidden. He knew she still had it. She just didn't have the stored chakra for it to be visible, but if he could feel it, then Naruto could too. And any of the Sannin would probably recognize it too. Things had changed in the last month. The three of them now sat together in class, Sasuke against the wall to keep others away and Naruto in the middle so that they could protect him from everyone. Iruka Sensei was actually encouraging their group forming, and looking back, the man had tried so hard to help him and he'd rebuffed every effort, especially once Naruto had started becoming close to the sensei. It gave him hope that they'd be kept together as Team 7 even with Naruto's improving grades. Plus, there was Kakashi's link to Naruto, and his being the only one who could teach Sasuke to use the Sharingan, which meant the two of them at least should be destined for Kakashi's team so long as they didn't screw anything up too badly. It was nice having the protection from the fangirls. They didn't like being near Naruto, and Sakura had been one of the worst. Sasuke had started bringing in healthy lunches for the two of them, and Sakura would also bring extra food to share, though her parents believed it was for Sasuke alone, as she told them of his obsession with tomatoes to explain it. It meant the three of them were eating a lot better than they had at this point the first time, and it was already showing results. Naruto had actually grown some, his jumpsuit pulling at wrists and ankles. Sakura was putting on weight and losing the diet-thin look, something her mother wasn't too happy with, so Sasuke had made sure he was near the woman while commenting on how utterly idiotic some of the girls nearby were for dieting. Even Sasuke was feeling stronger than he remembered. Tomatoes were good for you, but no food was good in excess. It would be even better once they were all under the one roof and could learn to cook more. Naruto knew some, but he'd spent too long on the road with Jiraiya, at war, or struggling to make ends meet as a child to know much. Sasuke knew more since he hadn't had the issue of lack of resources as a child. He even spent time helping his mother in the kitchen. But Sakura was the best cook out of the three of them thanks to her parents. They'd begun making plans for when they were able to deal with Danzo, and were torn over straight out assassinating the monster or revealing the truth in a way that would force Sarutobi to act. A part of his mind screamed to deal with him personally, but he'd learned since returning to Team 7 to not give that part of himself control. Besides, he'd killed the man once. Naruto deserved a crack at him if he wanted it for what he'd done to his people and their village. Honestly, Sasuke still wasn't sure they should stay in Konoha with all the rot hidden by the shiny facade. But he didn't trust himself to make that decision. And then he yelped as Sakura and Naruto flipped and pinned him, wriggling as they sought out his few ticklish spots. "Teach you to get lost in your head." Sakura smirked at him. They all had trouble with that, and they were all getting good at noticing when it happened and snapping that person out of it. It wasn't surprising considering everything they'd been through. They were just lucky no one else had noticed. Yet, Sakura shut her bedroom door and leant against it, exhausted and frustrated, fighting tears. They were talking about pulling her from the academy, despite the interest Sasuke had been careful to slowly show towards her. What had changed that they weren't so keen on her marrying him one day? Was it really her taking being a shinobi so much more seriously? She was stuck under their roof until she either graduated or turned 16. They couldn't afford for that to happen. She'd have to talk to Naruto and Sasuke about it. But what could they do? Still, no secrets. They'd sworn that years ago. She took a breath and went to her desk to do her homework. Naruto and Sakura pressed against Sasuke, seeing his eyes go blank in rage, Sharingan flickering. Naruto took his hand and then kissed him softly to bring him out of it. He understood his anger. Sakura's parents were threatening to separate her from them. He'd always been better at shoving down negative emotions. He'd had to be with the way the villagers had treated him. But it had gotten harder since he changed. Sasuke took a shaking breath and then pulled Sakura into his arms, holding on tightly. "It's okay, Sasuke, we'll figure it out," she was whispering. Naruto pressed even closer, wrapping his arm around Sasuke's back. Between the two of them they had him boxed in, and it'd take him effort to get free of them to go after the Harunos. Something he couldn't if he didn't want to risk arrest for assault or worse. He didn't blame Sasuke for being angry. Here Sakura was trying to be a better shinobi, and for that her parents were threatening to pull her from the academy. He didn't know a lot about the rules around the academy. He knew once graduated there was no resigning until you'd served 10 years in the forces. The Sandaime had been the one to enroll him, so his circumstances had been different. If the genin failed their sensei's test, then they could return to the academy or quit, but if they passed, then they were genin, and that was that. Was there some way to keep her at the academy even against their wishes? She was one of the top students after all. He hadn't seen Gigi since his birthday. Would he be willing to intervene? "Maybe we should talk to Iruka-sensei? He would know if there's any way around it," he offered. Last time, Sasuke would never have considered it. He hadn't really seemed to like Iruka, but now he nodded. Better to start with their teacher than go straight to the Hokage. Sasuke dug through his father's office, looking for the official clan paperwork. He had more trust in Iruka than he had the first time, but while the man was trusted to work in the mission's office and the Hokage often used him for various things, he was still a clanless chunin. It hadn't been done when he was little, but he'd heard the old stories of clans taking in and fostering promising children. If the laws were old enough to be part of Konoha's charter, it had to be him. Naruto wasn't meant to know of his own heritage after all. Another reason to despise those in power in the village. They dared to treat the son of their precious fourth and the last Uzumaki princess like they did. It didn't hurt so much to go through the records as it had the first times he had attempted it. It had simply been far too long, and there had been so many losses since. He was glad he'd reinforced the protective seals on the house, since it kept his guard from tracking where in the house he was from the outside. His presence in the office would worry them, considering he'd collapsed the first time he'd attempted to sort it only a year ago by their thinking. Finally, buried under so much unimportant work, sealed with blood, Iruka watched the three as they sat together. For once it was Sakura sitting protected in the middle, with Sasuke acting as a barrier. It had been long enough that most of the girls didn't bother approaching him, which was wonderful since it meant less disruptions and also that they were focusing more on their studies. He'd been shocked when the trio approached him about the threat Sakura's parents had made. She had always been the best student when it came to theory, but for the last 2 months, ever since Sasuke had begun tolerating their presence, she had improved her other grades. He had been happy to learn she had stopped dieting and was working on physical conditioning. Sadly, there was nothing he could do. They were within their rights to remove her from the academy. Until she graduated, she was a child and therefore under their authority. Iruka had thought her father would be more reasonable when he'd organized a meeting with them, but both were adamant about removing her, and it hurt, but her newfound closeness to Naruto was part of the reason, though not the whole one. He managed to buy time till the end of term, to let her have the time with her friends, but that was all. Iruka was worried about the plans they had for her future, but he was also worried about Sasuke and Naruto. Would they fall apart without her to act as a buffer? Or would they move even closer in defense? He'd been glad that the three of them had begun bonding, had watched in pride as the two brought plenty of good food to share with Naruto, had helped with his classwork. Naruto had been so desperately lonely, all three of them had in different ways. He thought he had a nicely formed team so long as they all graduated at the same time, something he could see happening now with Naruto's improving grades, but without Sakura. The Sandaime was always willing to listen, perhaps he should tell him, see if he had any ideas. Iruka already knew that getting one of the other girls to sit near them wouldn't work. The only one they really seemed to tolerate outside their group was Hinata, but she was too meek to work well with them. They needed someone like Sakura who would speak her mind and stand her ground. He really didn't want to lose such a good student, a promising future shinobi, especially to a future of young marriage to someone of money and good standing where she'd be expected to be a lady and provide children, trapped within her home. For some, they would like that life, but Sakura, it would kill her, not physically, but it would destroy her spirit. Sasuke? Sakura looked from him to the scroll he was offering. I found it. He was acutely grinning, which, wow. She slowly accepted the scroll, hesitating when she recognized the seal, though they weren't active. This was one of the clan founding documents for the Uchiha within Konoha. When he made an impatient motion with a hand, she unrolled it to begin reading, not sure what had him so excited. Sakura read right on past it before freezing and going back. Sasuke-kun? She whispered. I'm clan head by our laws, he pointed out. I can bring you into the clan as your sponsor. It hasn't been done in years, but it's still a valid law. Your parents couldn't remove you from the academy unless I agreed. Naruto could do it too if he was meant to know of his heritage at this point. She nodded, hating that so much had been kept from Naruto. How better would his childhood have been if he knew? The arguments against his knowing were stupid. His name was Uzumaki. That would make him enough of a target even if he didn't look so much like Minato. Anyone with a brain would work out his parentage, and his being Jinchuriki hadn't been much of a secret among adults either. She refocused on the scroll. How long had it taken Sasuke to dig it out? She knew her boys loved her, and this was just one more proof. It wouldn't make her Uchiha. Only marriage would do that, but it would give her legal protection and the backing of a clan, even if it was a clan of one. Technically 3, but it wasn't like Itachi or Obito would be coming back anytime soon. Naruto was suddenly draped over her shoulder to see what she was looking at. She hadn't even sensed him coming. Both boys had become experts at hiding to escape their guards for training. This could work, he laughed, hugging her. No fair, you get to be a Uchiha, he mock-pouted. Sasuke will be my sponsor, Naruto. That doesn't make me a clan member, she pointed out. Still more one than I am. He teased, and she was glad he was teasing. He'd been so scared that day that they would reject him, but she didn't care. He wasn't really human anymore, and she knew Sasuke didn't either. And she was adapting to being exposed to him without the seal too. It was good training. Kakashi and Zabuza would be shocked when the three of them shrugged off the killing intent during the wave mission, but even after their assurance that first day, it had taken time for him to fully accept that they didn't care. She knew part of it was grief for Kurama, whom they all missed. Naruto and Kurama had gotten really good at switching out on the fly, though the Biju had always retreated deep into the seal when the three of them were together, or even a pair of them. He had no interest in human mating rituals apparently. Kurama had been with Naruto his whole life, even if he hadn't been aware of him, and she knew his grief was 1,000 times worse than theirs. Yes, Sasuke was mourning Itachi, but it was with the knowledge that a younger version of his brother existed now. Do you want to do this? Sasuke asked, and she was surprised to find he was nervous, not that most would be able to tell. She smiled at him, and his eyes lit up with happiness and relief. It wasn't what they all wanted, to be truly family in the eyes of everyone in the law, but it was a first step. No one would ever allow them to marry. They were too young, but once they were genin, technically it was legal. Finding someone who would sign off on it with Naruto though might be impossible, and she refused to marry only Sasuke. Knew he felt the same. Triads were incredibly rare, but they did happen. Hiruzen stared at the paperwork before him in surprise, rereading it again. He smirked. Well, they had solved that. Iruka had come to him a few days ago, explaining what was happening, but it was out of even his hands. They had the right to withdraw their daughter, especially with a year until graduation age. He had known the three were growing closer, and it had been a relief. He had wished for Naruto to have friends, and he had been very worried about young Sasuke's mental stability. It appeared that now those worries were not so needed. Clan sponsorship forms completed by clan head Uchiha Sasuke and signed by Hirano Sakura with Uzumaki Naruto, Tsuchi, and I am signing as witnesses. 2 adults, and though Naruto didn't know it, another clan head, as witnesses. No one could say the forms were invalid. He stamped them and sent them to be filed. The only way Sakura could now be removed from the academy was with Sasuke's agreement, and it was quite obvious that would not be given. It seemed they had a new Team 7 and Kakashi was not going to be pleased, but he was the only possible sensei for such a team. 3 black-clad figures made their way through the quiet village. They moved fast but silently, spread out but following the leader. They easily avoided the various patrols, remaining unseen as they dropped into the well-hidden entrance. They had memorized everything Yamato and Sai knew of the tunnels and various bases years ago, and had been doing their own reconnaissance as part of their training. As they moved through the tunnels, seals were placed strategically to ensure they wouldn't be interrupted. They weren't looking for a fight or anything after all. His plan was for Danzo's death to appear either natural or accidental. They couldn't risk any suspicion, not that they had any known reason to go after the man. They had their hair covered and wore masks as well, with illusions under the masks in case they were dislodged, just in case they were spotted. They moved along the ceilings to stay out of sight, for all of the man's paranoia. He was still human, and even shinobi often forgot to look up. Naruto had managed to place a tracking seal on the man by literally bumping into him in the Hokage's office to celebrate a good test result. So they knew he was in the base, and Sakura had several poisons secreted about herself. They were slow acting and would break down in the body fast. They wanted him to drop dead in public, for people to try to assist him and for his secrets to be revealed. They didn't want his crimes to be brushed under the rug. The sight of the Sharingan and Hashirama cells in his arm should get the clan's attention and help begin to clear Itachi. Sakura perched over the doorway, barely breathing, grateful for the seal that was helping conceal her presence. She was very good at hiding her own presence, but better safe than sorry, especially with someone like Dan. The first time. He'd have given them away a million times by now, but this Naruto could sit still and wait for days. And then her chance came, and she dropped the poison into the passing coffee cup. They waited long enough to ensure Danzo had drunk the contents, and then they vanished. They had a big day ahead of them after all. Iruka glanced around the classroom. He knew most of the students would be back in a few days or settling into the family business. The majority of graduates would be the clan children and the few others who had shinobi in their family. Only one team he was utterly positive of, especially after the fuss they had caused last year in order to keep Sakura at the academy. He was proud of Sasuke for reaching out so much for a friend that he had dug through his family archives to find the law that had kept her in Iruka's class. He knew they would all pass his exam, and he knew they would pass their new senseis since the council would not allow anything else for Sasuke. Back then, he wouldn't have had high hopes for Naruto graduating, but now he knew the blonde would pass. He was so proud of the improvements Naruto had made and how Sakura and Sasuke had helped him. He was ashamed of himself for never realizing just how much Naruto struggled with the academic side of things, for not realizing why he messed around so much in class. Why bother paying attention when he couldn't read the books or the board? Not properly. He was very proud of Sasuke and Sakura for the way they had helped Naruto overcome his previous lack of education. The other teams would partially depend on their scores, partially on his recommendations, on the kind of team the various Jonin were trying to form, and the Hokage's agreement. The only other obvious team was the Inoshikacho team, since that was an unbroken tradition older even than the village. He felt a bit sorry for the boys. Ino would drive them crazy, though she had quieted down a bit since Sakura had stopped competing with her over Sasuke. The three becoming friends had impacted the whole class. The majority of boys had taken their training more seriously to compete against Sasuke and Naruto, while the girls had backed off a bit, with Sakura acting as a block between them and Sasuke. Iruka knew they would be an excellent team. He began passing the written exam out as the bell rang. wishing the class good luck. Hiruzen sat back, inhaling the smoke of his pipe as another argument broke out. It was frustrating and far worse than usual. There was always some fighting over the best students or clan heirs, but this was something more. He didn't like it, but he always sought the input of the senseis. There was no point putting students with a teacher who would be unable to help their skills improve. It was not only a waste of everyone's time but potentially lethal. It took a while, but he noticed Danzo subtly needling at the group, pushing them towards certain students, and he frowned around his pipe. It was not his place. Considering Naruto and Sasuke were graduating, they had to be the reason for his old friend's interest. Danzo had wanted both of them for training, Naruto from the start and Sasuke after the massacre, but Hiruzen would not allow that, not after Root. He glanced at his old friend again, and found himself concerned for another reason. He could see sweat beading on his face, but his skin was pale. He had been in ill health for years, but this was becoming very obvious. He signaled one of the hidden Umbu to send for a medic. Better safe than sorry. Before the medic could arrive, Danzo clutched at his arm, breathing harshly. They quickly got him lying on the office couch, his clothing loosened even as Kurenai moved in, hands lit green with chakra. By the time the medic arrived, it was obvious Danzo would die. Still, the young man tried, needing full access to his chest, telling them he suspected a heart attack. He cut through the bandages, causing him to recoil. "What is it?" Hiruzen asked. Kakashi stepped in, and even he seemed to pale. "You need to see this, Hokage-sama," he stated. Hiruzen stood and approached, only to stare in shock and horror at Danzo's arm. Before anything else could happen, he died. The medic tried to revive him but failed, so the body was covered and taken away to autopsy. Despite appearing to be natural causes, they had to be certain, especially with someone of his rank. He collapsed back into his chair, shocked. He had always suspected Danzo wanted the Uchiha dealt with for his own reasons, but that, how far had he fallen? Only now did he truly accept that he should have done more to curtail Danzo's ambitions. Naruto walked in for the practical section of his exam. Sasuke and Sakura had already done it and passed. Iruka-sensei smiled slightly at him, another of the academy's teachers, with him to have someone impartial there. No one had ever replaced Mizuki with their class since Iruka-sensei had proven able to handle them all alone. The man had been caught trying to steal a certain scroll. The three of them had worked hard and had a lot of fun pushing him into making an attempt on it a lot earlier. He had been quickly caught and dealt with by Umbu, which meant Iruka got to miss out on taking a giant shuriken to the back. He'd never shown it, but Naruto now knew it had pained him to an extent for the rest of his life. As a Chunin Academy teacher, it hadn't affected his day-to-day life, but it had slowed him for field work and in the war. But not this time. As he hinged into Iruka-sensei's appearance, he bit back a smile, feeling as Danzo's chakra faded inside the Hokage's office. Perfect place, since he knew the Jonin would be meeting to begin discussing possible teams. He had no reason to know the Kage Bunshin, sadly, but he had finally managed to learn another clone, sort of. He'd been trying to do the normal Bunshin and had ended up doing something that looked the same. It was an illusion, but it definitely wasn't what the academy taught. They all just assumed it was something he could do now because of what he was. Just like how he shape-shifted to look fully human. He couldn't help grinning as a smiling Iruka-sensei handed him his brand new Hittite, even if he was a little sad to have one with no meaning behind it like last time. He rushed from the room, seeing the relief in Sakura and Sasuke that he'd passed. Even with the changes they'd made, how much they knew, it was still easy to worry. Sakura walked into the house, proudly wearing her Hittite, seeing her mother's face immediately fall. She knew they'd been hoping she'd fail, which would end Sasuke's sponsorship and allow them to pull her out. "I passed. Team assignments are tomorrow." She headed upstairs before her mother could say anything. After all, she had a lot of packing to do. Her room had changed over the last year and a bit, becoming less childish. But there was still a lot she didn't plan to take with her, since it was stuff that her mother had chosen for her. With Naruto's storage seals, she had all of 2 scrolls to carry in the end. All the girly things were left, they just weren't her, and she left out clothes for the next 2 days since she shouldn't move until Kakashi-sensei officially declared them a team. Kakashi had no desire at all to take on a genin team, but he was being pushed to due to who was on the team. He hid himself and watched the class. At least the brats were already sitting together even before being announced as a team, Hopefully that would mean they had some form of teamwork ability. He'd been part of Naruto's guard when the boy was small, but it had been a few years since he'd seen him in more than passing around the village. He'd read their files, knew that the three had begun becoming friends almost a year and a half ago. Apparently that had been a big relief, since before then Sasuke had been completely closed off to everyone. The girl, Sakura, was nothing like her earlier file, and apparently it was all down to a run-in with some genin who had teased her but then offered advice. Perhaps the academy should have older girls talk to the students. He could see quite a few in the class who looked ridiculous, far too skinny, no muscle tone. And what were they wearing? Thankfully the clan girls looked far more like shinobi in training, but several still weren't to standards. He was impressed by how easily Yumino got the to investigate the man's home with a team, searching for any natural causes. They were just waiting on the final report from the medics. Kakashi doubted many people would mourn the man, except the Hokage and his advisors. Only someone familiar with the Uchiha would recognize the relief in Sasuke's expression as Team 7 was read out, the three of their names called together. Naruto's grin could be used to power the village. It was so wide and bright, and Sakura's smile was smaller but also relieved. Now to test their patience, so he headed for the memorial stone to tell Sensei and Obito about their family members. Sasuke stretched out in his chair, leaning back a little, relaxing since they were alone. They had all sensed Kakashi-sensei's presence during the team announcements, but now he was gone. The memorial stone. None of them had seen the man since returning to the past, and Sasuke wasn't sure how he felt about meeting him again. He wasn't the same Kakashi that they'd lost, whose death had finished breaking Obito. They all knew Kakashi hadn't wanted a team, that they'd been forced on him because of Sasuke's eyes and Kurama. Of all the available senseis, Kakashi had been the best bet should the seal have trouble, since he had a Sharingan. "How long do you think?" Sakura asked, leaning against his side. "It might not be as long thanks to yesterday's drama," Naruto offered even as he set up the eraser over the door. "Really?" Sasuke asked, shaking his head slightly. "What? He deserves it for making us wait so long." Naruto pouted. "Want to go get lunch?" Sakura suggested, but Sasuke shook his head. "Too chancy. We need to be here when he arrives." It was tempting, but better to be safe than sorry. Who knew what Kakashi would do if he returned to find them gone? Naruto walked over and slumped down beside him, their knees touching under the table, but nothing that would be noticed unless a Hyuga looked. Surprisingly, it was only an hour and a half before the door began to open and Kakashi got an eraser full of chalk dust dumped in his hair. He stared at them and Sasuke smirked even as Naruto held his hand across his body so that he could high-five Sakura, who rolled her eyes but did so, obviously trying not to laugh. "My first impression is, I hate you. Meet me on the roof." And with that he was gone. Naruto burst out laughing at the exact repeat of their first meeting, but then they got up to leave, Sakura hesitating. "What is it?" Sasuke asked. "Should we impress him?" She motioned to the window. It was very tempting, and maybe if he saw how seriously they'd been training, Kakashi would put more effort in. The man was said to have over 1,000 jutsu after all. Yes, they had been very good, the new Sannin, but their jutsu repertoire had been very small and specialized. Sakura's had been the worst, as she'd ended up focusing on healing and learning Tsunade's strength techniques. So he nodded and they took off out the window, walking up the side of the academy to meet Kakashi. Kakashi lounged on the roof after dusting off his hair, book in hand, as he considered their first official meeting. He'd let the eraser hit him to see how the kids reacted. They had been sitting together, and while he couldn't confirm it, Sasuke and Naruto had been sitting close enough for them to be in some kind of bodily contact under the table, while Sakura had visibly been leaning against the last loyal Uchiha. And then she'd high-fived Naruto too, even if she had rolled her eyes. But was that enough to get them through his test? And then he felt them approaching, up the side of the building? Sure enough, three heads soon appeared as they flipped up and over the end of the wall to land on the roof, as if they had casually strolled up the stairs. Who had taught them that? It definitely was not part of the academy curriculum, but he didn't let his surprise show, instead waving at them to sit down. "Well, first you should introduce yourselves. What should we say?" Sakura asked him. "Maybe you should go first, Sensei." Naruto grinned, and Kakashi slouched more but decided to humor them. "I'm Kakashi Hatake. Things I like and things I hate. I don't feel like telling you that. My dreams for the future," Never really thought about it. As for my hobbies, I have lots of hobbies. Your turn, Pinky. My name is Haruno Sakura. I like Sasuke-kun and Naruto-kun. I hate bigots and those who pick on people weaker than them. My dreams for the future? I'd like to be a medic mean to rival Tsunade herself. My hobbies are reading and keeping these two from killing themselves or each other. She grinned cheekily. Sakura. Naruto grumbled, pouting at her. Well then, Blondie, you next. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage. I like Sakura-chan and Sasuke-kun and ramen. His tone was teasing on the kun, and Sasuke just smirked slightly. I hate. That's kinda complicated. I'm gonna be the Hokage one day and protect everyone. I like gardening and training. He shrugged at the end. Well, that was two introductions that weren't how he'd expected them to go. The only part that went as he thought it would was Naruto's claim of being the future Hokage, which either teammates seemed to dismiss. That leaves you. He pointed to the Uchiha. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I like Sakura and Naruto. He started. And tomatoes. Sakura chimed in with a laugh. I hate traitors and bigots. I like training and spending time with those worth it. I plan to rebuild my clan. Alright then. No mention of his brother, at least not directly. Was that good or bad? The three of you are very interesting. We'll have a mission tomorrow. What kind of mission? Sasuke asked. A survival exercise. That doesn't sound like a mission, Sensei. Sakura told him. This is no simple exercise. He chuckled, trying to throw them off. Of the 27 graduates, only 9 will be recognized as genin. The remaining 18 will be sent back to the academy. In other words, this exercise is an extremely difficult test with a failure rate of 66% or higher. That's stupid. To say only 9 can pass no matter how good a class might be? It's just limiting the village forces for no good reason. Sasuke scoffed, and he actually might have a point there. Why have the graduation exams at all? Sakura demanded. Oh that? It was just to select those with the potential of becoming genin. He smirked behind his mask, even as he pondered Sasuke's words. I'll be determining whether you pass or fail. Bring all of your shinobi tools. We meet at 5 in the morning at Training Ground 3. He waited a moment, but they remained silent. Okay then, you're dismissed. He turned away but then stopped. Oh, and you'd best skip breakfast. You don't want to throw up. And with that he left. Naruto packed up his apartment, making sure to pack his equipment for the test separately. He was excited but also nervous. What if they did something that made Kakashi fail them? What if he got suspicious? He stopped and took a deep breath. No. It was no good thinking like that. They'd just do their best to get the bells without using anything from the future. They'd already shown off they knew tree walking and could use it on buildings. That, the academy basics, and their teamwork would have to get them through. Naruto got into his lumpy bed for the last time, looking forward to finally all living under the one roof. Sure, they'd been to the Uchiha compound, but only to visit since staying overnight would have been frowned upon, at least for Sakura. Just like they'd been to his apartment, as they became more obviously friends. They'd never gone to Sakura's, though her parents had met them all. When they found out that Sasuke was sponsoring Sakura to keep her in the academy. That had not been fun, and would probably happen again, but worse once they realized Sakura was moving out and in with the two of them. When they were old enough to let their real relationship slip. Ugh, how did it go? Hiruzen asked, sensing the presence at the window. Not as I expected, Kakashi admitted, and Hiruzen chuckled. They have changed since becoming friends, for the better it seems? He questioned, and Kakashi hummed in response. Sasuke doesn't seem focused on revenge against his brother. Sakura wants to be Tsunade's equal, and Naruto still wants to be Hokage. The next Sannin? Well, that could be interesting. Though thankfully they had likely not heard of Orochimaru, Sasuke taking after him was the last thing the village needed. And he would make sure Jiraiya did not pass on his more questionable habits to his godson when they finally met. Maybe. Kakashi didn't seem to believe they could do it. Only time would tell. They made it to the training ground to find no sign of Kakashi-sensei, as expected. So they began to prepare for the test, Naruto setting traps around the area while Sakura and Sasuke began warming up. They'd also ignored the instruction to not eat, knowing they'd need the energy. Looking back, it was obvious they were meant to occupy themselves when he was late, and they'd wasted so much time just sitting around back then. Not this time. Okay, so the kids were definitely doing better than any of the other possible teams he'd been given. They were actually making use of the time to train with each other rather than sitting around and pouting over him being late. And he wasn't as late as usual. He'd been too curious to stay away, even at the memorial stone. He didn't want to pass them, not with all the memories they brought up. But if he didn't, then he had to have a very solid reason. And it wasn't just the boys training like did occasionally happen. Sakura was right there in the thick of it, flipping Sasuke off his feet, the boy twisting in the air to land on his feet. Impressive considering that was not an academy move and he'd had no one to train with for several years. Then Naruto got her, pinning her briefly before bouncing up and going after Sasuke. Unless they fell apart due to his test, he'd have to get used to the idea of having a team. And both Sasuke and Sakura had the kind of grades that said they'd likely see through his two-bell ploy. Looked like he'd have to put some actual effort in his life from the start. As a big brother figure, it hurt. Even knowing he'd been kept from approaching as more than one of his guard didn't help all the time. The way he'd favored Sasuke in the early days and had only really paid attention to him after he'd come back from his training trip, that had been hard to accept. Then the idiot had to go and die to protect him, taking Obito's will to live with him. He'd lost both of his should have been big brother/uncles too close together. Would it be different this time? Could he get Kakashi to see him this time? Sasuke kept an eye on Naruto, knowing of his mixed-up feelings concerning their sensei and how he'd treated him when he was younger. First time around, he'd reveled in getting the attention Naruto had so clearly desired, even not knowing of the connection Kakashi had to his family. This time, he'd kick the man's ass if he tried that again. He could be forgiven for the earlier years when his hands had been tied. But once he became their sensei, he should have done more for Naruto. And he should have kicked Sasuke's ass more instead of making him feel special. He'd spotted some of Naruto's traps, knew the man was in for a lesson even if he didn't know why he was being targeted. He'd grown up with Kushina. He'd realized Naruto was pranking in payback for something. Naruto would be teaching him a lesson. It'd be up to Kakashi to work out what it was and hopefully be a better sensei from the start. Sakura dodged, twisting to the side, seeing the flash of surprise in Kakashi's eye. She dropped suddenly and Sasuke was springing over her, Naruto coming in low from the other side. Once, she would have hit the ground to shatter it beneath an enemy, but she couldn't do that now. Instead, she sent several kunai towards Kakashi, and the trap rigged behind him. Kakashi vanished, a log replacing him, but her trained medic eye caught the glint of blood on one of her blades as she scooped them up on her way into the trees. First blood to them. Kakashi was honestly shocked as he stared at the three genin. And they were. It had to be official because there was no way he could legitimately fail them. Sakura had drawn blood. The three of them had worked together better than some seasoned Chunin teams, but how? Naruto's traps were just not something he wanted to think about, but he was burning his uniform as soon as he got home. And he could have sworn Sasuke's eyes flickered red at least once. Not only that, but each of them was holding a bell, and he couldn't tell which was the fake. "You pass," he told them, and then was nearly deafened by the cheers. Sasuke was silent, but was that a smile? Sakura took a deep breath and glanced back at where her boys were waiting for her. It had been hard to convince them to let her do this herself. She understood, but she needed to do it. She opened the door and stepped inside. "I'm home," she called, and her mother emerged from the kitchen, seeming to deflate when she saw she was still wearing her hitayate. "Your team was confirmed then," she stated tensely, and Sakura nodded. "I came to let you know I'm moving out. Now that I'm officially a genin, I'm an adult. You're my parents and I love you, but you've made it impossible to live here the last few years. Where will you go? You have no money for a place. I don't need it." With that, she turned and left, Sasuke and Naruto soon falling into step beside her. Sasuke wasn't nervous at all as he led them to the Uchiha compound. They'd been over sure, but this time it was different. This time they wouldn't be going home. The compound was now their home. They'd be putting the updated paperwork in tomorrow to make it official, knowing the Hokage would bring Kakashi around to see their living arrangements. They hadn't been over in a few days, and he'd used that time to finish getting everything ready. They couldn't risk giving the council or anyone any ammunition to use to break up their team, which meant they each had their own bedroom. But that didn't mean they had to use them for more than storage. He unlocked the door, and then handed them each their own key, getting grins in return. "Welcome home." It felt so right to say that. He led them to their rooms and then to his, and the new large bed. Then he staggered back under Naruto's weight, his arms moving automatically to brace the blonde, hearing Sakura laugh. With them beside him, maybe the ghosts in the house would finally be put to rest. Hiruzen looked at the flustered Nin before him and took the paper, looking them over. Kakashi's report on their bell test and did raise some questions. How had they reached such a level without outside help? But there was no sign of anyone helping them. It seemed they all had the natural talent and had just needed the competitive push. He pulled out his stamp, placing it on both forms, ensuring no one could argue with the arrangement. Perhaps this Team 7 would turn out far better than any of the previous ones. Naruto and Sasuke deserved to have family, to have safety and friendship. He did wonder what Itachi would think when word eventually reached him that his brother had opened their home to his teammates. Mikoto would have been delighted to have Kushina's son under her roof finally, and she would have doted on young Sakura as well. He knew she had wanted a daughter. Maybe Naruto would be ready to begin learning of his heritage sooner than he'd originally thought. He looked back down at the mess on his desk. How had he allowed all of this to happen under his nose? He had trusted Danzo, they had been friends for so long, had served together on the same team many times, and he had used those connections to slip so much under the radar. Every time he thought he'd reached the end, more files would be found or show up. Obviously, someone knew but had remained silent, by choice or threat, but now was passing on their intel. They had found the miles of tunnels under the village, and Umbu was investigating. The biggest issue was Root itself. All of them were highly ensure there was no risk of teen pregnancy, but it would be better not to push their bodies in they were finished developing, not when they were pushing so hard to get back to their old skills. Today would be their first true day as Team 7. How would their changed test result affect their training? Would Kakashi wise up and actually teach them, or would he need more pushing? The paperwork had been filed with his and Sakura's change of address. Would someone try to argue? For all the Sandaime had put them on the same team. Looking back, he didn't think he'd ever really trusted Sasuke around him, which after learning why Kurama had attacked made a little sense. It seemed he had liked their rivalry as it kept a distance between them. As much as he had loved the Sandaime, had seen him as his grandfather in many ways, there were a lot of questions. The sooner they had a new Hokage, the better for Konoha. Tsunade was the best choice of those who would be accepted. She had done a lot for the village last time, had initiated programs that really helped, especially in the hospital, but she also hadn't changed enough because she hadn't wanted to destroy her sensei's legacy. They really needed someone not connected to Gigi, but that was pretty much impossible. The Kakashi sensei of this time was nowhere near ready for the job, but his name would likely come up due to being the Yandaime's student. Soft lips pressed to his neck and he smiled. "Morning," he whispered. "Stop worrying," Sakura murmured. "Fine," he mumbled. And then he felt Sasuke's shift, sleepy dark eyes opening. "We've done everything we can." Sasuke yawned. They were right. They'd taken out Danzo and made sure files made it to who needed them. But what if that didn't change anything? "Worst comes, we leave," Sasuke grumbled, shifting closer. He was such a heat seeker in bed, and Naruto ran the hottest of the three of them now, but he definitely didn't mind the cuddling. "Leave?" Sakura lifted her head to look across Naruto's body at Sasuke. Yuzushi." He yawned again. "The cure." If it wasn't an emergency and they were together, Sasuke was the slowest to wake up, and Naruto thought it was adorable. Yuzushi the cure. It would be in better condition at the moment than when they last saw it, but to leave Konoha for it. It would make a good fallback point if needed. Who would think to look for them since he was meant to be ignorant of his heritage? And if he reactivated the defenses it had taken Uzumaki to get in, he could make the necessary changes to ensure an outsider couldn't weaken or bring them down like Root had the first time. Danzo hadn't liked the existence of the village, despite being close allies. His seals were disgusting messes. That true masters of the art existed, and wouldn't teach him had led to him helping the village fall. Naruto had made sure that file would reach the Sandaime, and Tsunade, After all, she was part Uzumaki through her grandmother Mito. If Danzo wasn't already dead, she'd be making sure of it once she read those files. If there hadn't been so much going on the last time around when she found out, it wouldn't have been pretty. As it was, she'd basically punched a mountain down in reaction, but it had taken out a lot of the White Setsu army, so it had been handy. It'd need a lot of work, and we'd have to recruit or something. Sakura sat up with a sigh, and Naruto rolled over enough to watch her stretch. Come on, just because Kakashi-sensei's going to be late doesn't mean we don't have stuff to do. Naruto nodded while Sasuke groaned. Naruto laughed, but then pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. I'll bring you tea in bed, he promised before getting up too. When he glanced back, he could barely see Sasuke's hair above the blankets. He went to the kitchen to find Sakura had the kettle warming already. Breakfast started. Thanks. He grinned at her, going to grab a mug for Sasuke. No delicate teacup for him. Not the way he guzzled the stuff first thing in the morning. With the seals he could feel around the house, they didn't have to worry about any surveillance, so they were free to just be themselves. Kakashi stared at the memorial stone, eyes lingering on his teammates, on Sensei and Kushina. He didn't know what he was doing. Sure, he'd helped train Umbu teams, but fresh genin? He was pretty sure he couldn't treat them the same. Obito would be laughing at him over this, he just knew it. Kushina would come back from that he was an Uchiha. There was very little resemblance between Obito and Sasuke. No, Sasuke reminded him the most of himself, though he was apparently becoming a better person, something he'd never managed. He never would have spent time digging with him. Naruto had definitely needed it. He'd seen his apartment, and news of Sakura's family issues had spread. No matter how quiet some had attempted to keep them, with the last Uchiha's involvement it was prime gossip. Living under one roof should help them bond even better as teammates. He shouldn't have to deal with any of the normal issues the first mission outside the village usually brought when it came to camping, except of course houses had doors and plumbing. So maybe he'd still have to deal with a few of them. Yeah, he was going to mess those kids up even more than they already were. What had the Sandaime been thinking? He sighed. That he was the best available to teach Sasuke once he woke his Sharingan, and also the most likely to be able to contain Naruto outside of Tenzo, and he was an Umbu still. He sighed and glanced at the sun. He was only an hour late, but maybe he should at least see what they were doing. Life was kind of boring. They'd done what they could to get things moving, and occasionally they'd hear a whisper or two, but nothing seemed to be changing yet. It was frustrating, and he wanted to do more. Wanted to go out and find his brother and cousin, knock sense into both and have Sakura work on Itachi. But he couldn't. Not now he was officially a genin. Sometimes it felt like a mistake, but even if he hadn't graduated, there was no way the Hokage would have just let him leave. Training was better than he remembered. Kakashi wasn't punctual but not as tardy as he used to be. And he was doing more than pushing teamwork on them all the time like back then, because they were already a team. Though, he was pretty sure he hated that damn cat even more this time. The only one able to handle it was Naruto, the animal sensing something and not willing to attack or anger him. At least Sakura's parents had finally gotten the hint, and hadn't tried to make a fuss over her moving out and into the Uchiha compound. It saved them one headache. He felt bad, he still missed his own parents. But hers had made their choices and had to face the consequences of their own actions and attitudes. One day, when they had children, they would let them be whatever they wanted, shinobi or not. He would never put the pressure on a child that his own father had put first on Itachi to be the best, and then him to measure up to Itachi. Naruto would love the children no matter what too. Kids loved Naruto. He knew Sakura had wanted children, but it hadn't been possible in the original timeline. He couldn't wait until the wave mission. If they even got it, and they all knew there was chance they wouldn't. But if they did, then it was going to go differently. They would handle Gato immediately, even if it took clones to do so. Zabuza and Haku would live. Maybe that wasn't a massive change, but Mei could use their help. Naruto had already sent a warning to Suna about Orochimaru, though they all doubted the Kazekage would listen, and after everything he'd done to Gaara, well, none of them would shed a tear for the man. But it would be better if Suna was not involved in the invasion. As allies, they'd still come for the exams, giving them the chance to grab Gaara and help him. The second exam was something he was dreading. He knew Orochimaru would target him, even if he never showed his Sharingan in public. Beating him would be so simple in his grown body. As a 12-year-old, it'd take all three of them, and they were still torn over letting the man live or not. He had proven useful in the end after all. But did that outweigh all the horrendous things he'd done? It was hard, knowing what to change and what to leave. One wrong move and they could doom the world. Danzo was dead. The main reason for the death of his clan was dead, and of natural causes apparently. Did that mean their deal was void? Would the village move on his brother? Surely not. Everything he heard had Sasuke as the beloved last Uchiha. That reverence would have to be destroyed before anyone would get away with harming him. But he was a genin now, and accidents happened. But Kakashi was his sensei. He would protect Sasuke with his life. He would never allow harm to any of the children on his team. But if the Hokage ordered it, or if they faced a fight with large enough numbers to divide his attention too far, he would need to find an excuse to slip away and check on things in person as soon as possible. He loved Konoha, was loyal even though no one knew it. But he also loved his brother, and if he had to remove him from the village to protect him, he would. Hiruzen smiled as Team 7 entered the mission room. The three children walking side by side, Naruto in the middle and Kakashi slouching behind them. In a way, it was sad to see Naruto out of his orange jumpsuit, but it was better for his safety that he had changed his style. Really, the only one who looked similar to their academy style was Sasuke, because he still wore traditional Uchiha colors and styles. Young Sakura had moved to much more appropriate clothing for a shinobi, though the red was still quite striking, but with her hair color there wasn't really any way for her to not stand out. Naruto still had some orange in his outfit, but it was darker and much less noticeable. He looked older, less like a child and more like the shinobi he was becoming. And he looked a lot like his parents. The resemblance was becoming more and more noticeable the older he got. How long until something was said in his hearing or someone dangerous worked it out? Perhaps it was time to recall Jiraiya for at least a time to further Naruto's training. There were whispers of unrest, growing tensions, and if it came to war, as it inevitably would, they could not be the only nation with the Jinchuriki who could not use the power of the Biju. Jiraiya would not allow Naruto to become a weapon unlike anyone else who might be able to teach him, and if the seal destabilized, he would be the best chance of fixing it. Of course, that meant Naruto had to be told of his burden, something he dreaded doing. It was such a heavy burden for someone so young to bear. Naruto had grown a lot in the last year or two. He'd become quieter, no longer screaming about being Hokage, and it made him sad, but it seemed he no longer shouted for attention because now he had friends. Sasuke finally appeared to be recovering from the trauma of the massacre and what his brother had done to him. He personally believed Itachi had gone overboard. Then again, Sasuke had all but worshipped his brother. Perhaps such torture had been all that would break that and keep Sasuke loyal to the village rather than chasing after Itachi to stay with him. Despite her family issues, young Sakura had the most emotionally and mentally stable upbringing, and moving into the Uchiha district did not seem to have impacted her badly. Despite what had happened there, he watched the three teens look over the missions listed, chuckling at their groans over a certain cat. He looked up as Kakashi approached, listening to his reasoning. He checked their mission record and then nodded in agreement, picking up a mission scroll. A simple courier mission would be good for their first C rank. Think we'll still get hit by the first C rank curse even though technically we've already done it? Sakura asked as they packed. Sakura, Naruto whined, even as Sasuke chuckled. Does this mission mean we won't be able to snag the wave 1? The Uchiha asked in return. We should be back in time to do 2 weeks worth of D ranks in between, so not necessarily. She shrugged. And the missions to Suna? Naruto grinned at that. You want to try and arrange a way to fix Gaara's seal now? Sasuke looked at him, and Naruto nodded. Why not? If Gaara is sane, maybe his dad will back out of Orochimaru's plans. Maybe, or at least be more wary if they can't rely on Gaara losing it, Sakura admitted. Then she giggled. And this way he'll be sane when he comes here for the exams, so we can make sure he runs into Hinata. Sasuke groaned while Naruto laughed as they finished packing and went to bed. Hayashi had not particularly liked Fugaku, he would not deny that. But learning what had been done to the Uchiha, how hard would it be for another clan to find themselves in the same situation? Danzo may have been behind much of it, but Sarutobi also held a lot of blame. If all clan heads voted together along with the department heads though, They could probably oust him as Hokage. The problem was that there was no obvious successor. If there was, Sarutobi would have stepped down years ago. The elders had been very quiet since Danzo's death, and the reason was obvious. So he doubted they would do anything to stop them making Sarutobi step down. He had no desire to hold the hat himself, knew he'd never be accepted either. He had not been an active shinobi in too long, and the people were wary of the prominent clans taking the position. Jiraiya was the most obvious choice, but he would be a bad one. He was the spy master, and no woman would allow such a blatant pervert to control the village. Tsunade? She was basically a missing nin in all but name. Though she never worked against the village, she hadn't exactly helped them either. She should have returned 12 years ago, even if only for a limited time to help after the Kyuubi attack. How many lives could she have saved? Another reason to reject them was due to their having been Sarutobi's students. They needed someone with fewer links to their current Hokage. That also took Asuma out of the running. Not that he believed the younger Sarutobi wanted the job, not after how it had affected the family relationships. Guy had the power but would never manage to hold the respect. He was far too youthful. Kakashi was the best option of that age group, and he was the sole surviving student of the fourth. It would keep the lineage intact, which would make the traditionalists happier. He was also from a clan but was the last, which meant no clan politics to get in the way. He was famous, and while he read porn in public and was chronically tardy, he had served as an Anbu captain. He knew when to put such behaviors aside. But he also had a new genin team, one that needed careful training. So many of the best and brightest simply hadn't survived long enough. Their numbers were still recovering from the last war and Kyuubi attack. They could not appear weak before the other nations, or else they would find themselves in another war. He turned his head, dull blue-green eyes staring out across the desert even as Mother felt quiet. Something was coming. Sakura laughed as Naruto tripped, taking Sasuke down into the sand with him. They were having fun acting like they were new to sand walking, because there was absolutely no way to explain they already knew how. Thanks to her exemplary chakra control, she'd gotten it after 20 minutes, but 2 hours later and the boys were still playing. Not that anyone who didn't know Sasuke as well as she did would be able to tell he was playing. It was helping to keep all of their minds off what they would likely find in Suna. How much did Kakashi-sensei know about the situation there? Would he have accepted the mission if he did? It fit into their plans well though. They all knew Naruto would find a way to reach Gaara no matter who tried to stop them from meeting. Had Shikaka sensed Naruto's presence yet? How would he react when he did? They didn't really know how Naruto would measure up against the Jinchuriki, and Gaara would likely be the best to find out with. B wouldn't be too bad a choice either, except the relationship between their villages at the moment wasn't good. As laid back as he was, the man could be annoying, and if he saw Naruto as a threat to his brother or village, then it'd be a full-out fight. Besides, hadn't he been restricted to the village at this point? He sat on the dune, waiting. He could feel Mother stirring, agitated. That was not good. He would have to give her a lot of blood to calm her. The blood of those approaching would do well. Through Mother, he could sense one of them. He blazed like the sun, so much power. Naruto could feel them, Gaara and Shikaku. They were waiting for them outside of Suna. He flashed a sign to Sakura and Sasuke at an angle Kakashi-sensei wouldn't see. He needed to deal with them alone. Had been planning to wander off in Suna. He could replace himself with a clone, but if Shikaku fought, then Kakashi would notice. Gaara had picked his spot well. They would pass by, and if he attacked, Suna could use any evidence of a fight to break the alliance or put pressure on Konoha. That couldn't happen, which meant they had to keep Kakashi-sensei from noticing him. Great. Well, the sooner his seal was fixed the better. He caught Sasuke's eye, and then his form flickered so briefly even the Sharingan would miss it. Naruto hated leaving a clone with them, but there wasn't really any other choice. Gaara stood, sensing the other approaching fast, eyes widening at the speed, and then he was landing in the sand, another on top of him, everything going dark. Mother would. Naruto cradled the back of Gaara's head even as his eyes fell shut, body limp in the sand. Well, that was not how he wanted them to be introduced this time around. He carefully settled Gaara on the sand and then set up some seals to keep everyone away while he worked. He'd never actually asked Gaara where his seal was, but thankfully the one he'd slapped on him had totally suppressed not just Gaara's chakra but all those connected to his, which included Shikaku, and what was left from his mother within the sand. It was strange seeing Gaara without the sand armor. Despite it being totally blended in with his body and clothing, it was noticeable in one way once you knew about it. It had ever so slightly to his height and build. He felt like a real creep having to remove Gaara's top, but thankfully he found the seal on his chest, almost directly over his heart. And it was such a mess. Sakura had respected Chio, and Naruto had been grateful to the old woman for exchanging her life for Gaara's, but since that wasn't going to be necessary this time, they'd be having serious words over her work. The seal she used was never meant to hold a biju, and she hadn't drawn it perfectly either. Ugh. One claw cut delicately into pale skin, marking out a new seal, this time on Gaara's stomach like his own had been. It would create a barrier between the two. Gaara would be able to communicate with Shikaka, but the crazy Tanuki wouldn't be able to influence him or break free. It would also be a lot harder for Akatsuki to remove him should they capture Gaara again. Sasuke hated that Naruto had left, alone, to help. Had to stay with the man and Naruto's clone. It had always been practically impossible to tell the clones from the real Naruto. Now it truly was impossible. Kitsune were called tricksters in legends, the masters of illusion, and it seemed that was true. Illusions good enough to fool the Sharingan. Kurama may have had the shape of a fox and some of the nature of one, but he had been a biju, not a kitsune. So why had Naruto ended up more like the legends? Though thankfully he lacked a tail, then again, that could be rather cute, and mind on the mission. Kakashi was happy to reach the gates of Suna, well, technically the cliffs surrounding the village. Watching his kids fall on the sand had been very amusing their first day in the desert, but there was only so much sand anyone could take. He showed their papers to the guards and it took a while, but eventually they were cleared into the village itself. He didn't notice when Naruto flickered ever so slightly, the real Naruto returning to the team. Gaara opened his eyes and blinked slowly. He felt strange. It was so quiet. Mother? No, not Mother Shikaku. That was what the boy had called the voice. He made it quiet, had let Gaara sleep in peace. He owed him so much. Uzumaki Naruto. He got up, feeling his sand armor reform around him even as he picked up his gourd and left his room, heading to meet his team. For the first time in his life, he felt in control of himself and his abilities. And he knew what was coming, what the price of failure would be. It would not happen, not this time, not again. Temari glanced at Gaara, her baby brother, and couldn't help the fear. There'd been a time when she hadn't been afraid of him. Before their uncle died, Gaara had been gentler then. Something about his death had broken him, and she didn't know how to help him. He'd broken her arm once, a few years ago, and maybe that should have made her want to run, but she'd seen it, just for a second, the realization and regret. Under the madness and bloodlust, her little brother was still in there, and now, something seemed different. She glanced at him again, surprised when their eyes met. She held his gaze and felt a flicker of hope when she realized he was completely calm. Temari. He murmured her name. Gaara? He lifted his hand and she froze, torn. But then his sand-covered fingers were resting ever so lightly on her arm, the arm he'd broken. He was feeling for the old break. But the arm had been healed by a medicine. There was no sign of the injury, and he seemed to relax a little at that. Gaara, she whispered, unable to keep the hope from her voice. He looked up at her, and then away. Why? Why what? Ever so slowly, she reached her hand out, and he let her touch his arm, his sand not even shifting in reaction. Why did you stay? He asked, and she swallowed, taking a cautious step closer. Because you're my brother and I love you, no matter what, she promised, and he stared up at her. He nodded and then turned away, walking to where they were meant to meet Baki. She followed him quietly, mind spinning. Was it possible? Had the Ichibi lost its influence over him somehow? Could they get their little brother back? If he was shown to be sane, then surely their father would accept Gaara. He'd backed off since Gaara had become a shinobi, but it was obvious he still viewed Gaara as a liability. Sakura saw the redhead and the others with him, his team. How much had Naruto told him? They hadn't had the chance to talk about it since arriving. But then Gaara looked up, seeing her, eyes focusing on her Hittite, and then he nodded ever so slightly. She was so glad his seal had been dealt with. Hopefully that would help change things before the exam. She wasn't sure they'd be ready to face Orochimaru, but Naruto and Gaara together? They could do it, or at least make an escape possible. Sakura? Sasuke's voice had her turning to see him walking towards her. He spotted the Suna team and he nodded politely since Gaara was still looking their way. His hand brushed her arm and she wanted to take it, but she couldn't. They weren't even visibly dating in Konoha. It would be too risky to show such affection in another village, even one that was meant to be an ally. "I'm coming." She smiled up at him, and then they headed towards the administration building. They would be heading home in the morning, allies or not. No one liked foreign Nin in their village for long. Kakashi bit back a sigh of relief as they hit the trees. He was so done with sand. Not to mention some of the looks he'd gotten in Suna due to his father. Even with his mask, there were enough survivors of the war left that his similarities to the White Fan were obvious to them. It was strange how people could connect him to his father like that, and yet no one seemed to realize who Naruto looked like. It was better that way for his safety, but it hurt a little too. Had people forgotten Sensei so quickly, despite his massive head carved into the mountain? And he couldn't shake off the feeling that something big had happened in Suna while they were there. He just didn't know what. His team had gone out, but not far from the hotel, and the local Umbu would have been watching them. If anything had happened, Kakashi would have been told. They tumbled down onto the bed in a pile, limbs tangled. That was a downside to missions, having to sleep separately. Naruto was quite happy to end up in the middle, Sasuke pressed firmly against his back. And Naruto smirked as he felt something familiar. Just because they'd decided to not have sex for a few more years, didn't mean their bodies wouldn't react to certain things, especially with puberty kicking in. This time around, Sasuke would be there for them to hear his voice breaking and to see if that perfect Uchiha skin suffered teenage breakouts. With the Uchiha defenses and the seals he'd added since moving in, it was safe to release his seal, feeling as his body changed. He still wasn't used to the changes, but they insisted that they didn't care, that it was good for him to not always be forced to use the seal to hide. He shivered slightly when Sasuke's lips brushed the back of his neck before his breathing steadied and deepened as he fell asleep. Sakura hummed softly, her head against his shoulder, one arm thrown over his waist. The trip had been hardest on her, even with the training she did now. It wouldn't take as long as last time, but it'd still take years to build up the stamina and strength she was used to. At least she'd stop dieting before fully hitting puberty this time. Already he could feel the firmer muscles she had. The trip to Suna had hopefully helped begin to change things for the better for the village. He'd given Gaara all the information he could. He'd been Kazekage once. He would be able to handle it and act accordingly. He trusted his friend. He just wished he could have had time to really talk to him rather than using the seal to give him the knowledge. By the time the Chunin exams came around, he should be a lot saner due to getting sleep and not having Shikaku screaming at him. And Shikaku would hopefully begin to heal with a proper seal containing him. Not that horrible mess he'd been stuck in before. If only things were changing in Konoha. Then again, Sakura had said that Ino's dad seemed to be very busy before they'd left on their mission. So maybe things were beginning to move behind the scenes, hopefully. "I think I can tweak the barrier seals," Naruto announced, and Sasuke looked over at him. "For Orochimaru. If he sets those off, then at least his presence would be detected immediately, and they'd be more on guard during the exams. It could work if the Sandaime acts on it," Sakura agreed, looking up from her medical text. "HNN. Sasuke frowned. It might work, but it was also risky. Then again, even at this age, Naruto had been able to paint the monument in daylight without anyone noticing until he was done. His stealth was even better this time around. "Only if you're positive you won't be caught. Piece of cake." Naruto grinned, stretching, his shirt riding up to reveal nicely developing muscles. Sasuke stared. He was allowed, and yet as always there was a part of him that said he didn't deserve any of it. He'd gotten better at ignoring that voice over the years, but it had gotten louder again since waking in the past. He had his memories, even some of the power and abilities, of his older self, but his body was that of a young teen, crazy hormones and insecurities included. Naruto caught him watching and his cheeks went a little pink, but he didn't stop until he'd finished popping his spine. Sakura giggled and they both looked away from each other. No one paid him any attention as he patrolled the walls. He was just another Umbu going about his duties. Uzumaki seals were the best of the best. The village had them thanks to the links through Mito, but they had been left since Yuza had been destroyed. Some showed signs of Jiraiya checking them over and strengthening them, but that was it. For now, he would stick to just making sure Orochimaru was not an accepted person within the village. He'd have to think over how else they needed to be strengthened and altered. He didn't want to keep Itachi out, but the rest of Akatsuki? Especially Nagato and Obito, at least until they could be talked around. Hiruzen bit back a sigh as he took in those gathered before him. He knew why they were there. It was obvious. If you have a valid successor in mind, I will step down once the Chunin exams are concluded. The only possibility I have in mind is Tsunade. No, Shikaku spoke up. Not one of your students. We need a change in leadership. While her links to the first two Hokages would put her in the running, her actions rule her out. Then who? He pressed. Would one of them put themselves forward? Shikaku had the mind for it, but not the reputation or individual power. None of them held all of the necessary qualifications. There was a reason Kage candidates were rare. Sakura wiped the sweat from her eyes, feeling the sting, but she was pleased. The boys were too, she could feel it, even as they kept sparring nearby. She could also feel Kakashi-sensei staring. Considering she just shattered the training post, she could understand his reaction. He didn't know she'd once been able to shatter a mountain. She was getting her old strength back, slowly but surely. She wouldn't be the weak link during the exams, not this time. He watched, well hidden, but he hadn't been able to help coming to see for himself. His eyes widened slightly as he heard his little brother laugh, saw him shove at Naruto, who grinned back at him. It wasn't the first time he'd snuck in to see his brother, but he'd never seen him like this. He followed as the teammates left the training grounds for the Uchiha compound, and there he lost them, who had added to the family protections. How? Just what had been going on in Konoha? He would need to report into the Hokage and find out. Sasuke slumped onto the couch, Naruto and Sakura pressing close to him. Itachi, why had his brother returned early? Danzo's death or something else? He could swear he'd even felt a flicker of surprise from him. Then again, he'd probably seen him over the years, seen how cold and angry he'd become. He wanted his brother back, but how? It would be so much easier if he'd come back with them, but it had been impossible. He hoped his brother had been freed from the Edo Tensei and moved on to the Pure Lands in peace once they were gone. But this Itachi was different. He hadn't died yet, didn't know what his older self had. How could Sasuke explain? It'll be okay, Sakura whispered, kissing his cheek gently. Hiruzen looked up as a cloaked figure dropped to one knee before him, their face concealed from the surrounding umbu. He sighed and then inhaled deeply from his pipe before dismissing them. This was a meeting to be had in private. You have a report? He asked, and the kneeling figure pushed back their hood to reveal long black hair tied back in a low tail and pale skin. Akatsuki has begun to seek out the Jinchuriki. So far they are avoiding those with close ties to the villages. Seeking to remain hidden? He asked, and the younger man nodded. They are not yet ready to be revealed. Though, there is talk of perhaps targeting Naruto-kun soon. With the Chunin exams to be held in Konoha, infiltration would be easier. I see. Hiruzen sat back, feeling tired. That was always a risk with the exams. Too many people in and out for the village to be fully secure. Jiraiya was also hunting for more information on the group, because while Itachi was their spy, it wasn't always possible for him to send a report in time. The best time to get spies into another village was when they were hosting the exams. Everyone knew that, but it wasn't usually to target their Jinchuriki. There was no real way to increase security though, not with it already heightened for the exams. If Kakashi didn't enter the team, then he could send them out of the village. A long-term courier mission perhaps? Would it be easier to protect them within the village or by having them absent and therefore harder to find? But it found Kakashi was powerful himself, but against at least two S-ranked missing Nin and with a team to defend? Is my brother on his team, Hokage-sama? He is. Kakashi is their sensei. From all reports, they are a very good team. Their third is a girl from a civilian clan, but Sasuke sponsored her in the academy when her parents tried to remove her. His brother had what? That had not been in any of the status reports he'd been sent. Then again, that could be risky information to reveal. It was good though, surely that meant he was tied to the village. He had wanted his brother to hate him and love Konoha. It seemed the plan had worked. He had feared his brother would never again be happy, but the glimpse he'd caught earlier seemed to prove he'd been wrong. Have you seen him? Sandaime-sama asked, and Itachi paused before nodding slightly. He seemed happy. Itachi hesitated, but it was why he'd come. Rumors are spreading of Danzo had expected or planned for. It didn't change anything as far as he was concerned, but did it change things for Sasuke? Kakashi watched the kids train, seeing the way Sasuke was lagging a little. It wasn't incredibly obvious, but he'd been keeping a close eye on them since taking them on and was slowly picking up on their tells. He doubted anyone else could tell. The other two covered for him very smoothly. They always worked so hard. It wasn't a bad. Is Sasuke alright? He asked, seeing Naruto. Sasuke seemed drained. Naruto hesitated before running a hand through his hair, the spikes swaying wildly. Nightmares, he finally muttered. Bad? Kakashi asked carefully. Naruto snorted. His family were massacred. What do you think? Ah, good point. Maybe he should book Sasuke in for a mental evaluation. He was doing better, but professional help was meant to be good for you. He's fine, just tired. We woke him up before they got really bad and Sakura shoved one of those sleeping teas down his throat. We all get nightmares. He shrugged. That was true. He doubted there was a shinobi anywhere with any sanity left who didn't get nightmares. But even Sakura? He would have thought after her first kill, they hadn't really been in any dangerous situations yet, unless you counted death by cat. That made him wonder. Nightmares wasn't really surprising, not with his childhood. Sasuke looked at them and they nodded, so he even with them being at human and hidden behind seals. He moved towards where Itachi was hidden, sensing his frustration at the seals, smirking slightly. He landed lightly on the branch behind his brother. Nizan, he called softly. Itachi spun in shock at the sound of the familiar voice, older than the last he'd heard it but still very recognizable. Standing on the branch was Sasuke. But how? He'd been so careful to ensure no one would sense him. He couldn't be caught in the village. He wasn't ready for Sasuke to confront him. But there was something off. No anger or hatred in the dark eyes that stared at him. Had he not done enough to make Sasuke hate him? He didn't want to have to torture him again. He didn't. It's okay, Itachi, Sasuke told him. And Itachi watched in horror as Sasuke activated a fully mature Sharingan only for it to change to the Mangekyo Sharingan. Before he could do anything, he was caught in the Genjutsu. Sasuke saw the horror in his brother's eyes and felt bad for causing it. Itachi had no reason to think he would have the Mangekyo. He was meant to have been safe in Konoha after all. Though, technically seeing his parents die could have been enough to activate it. Good thing he didn't realize Sasuke had the eternal version. How? Not even Naruto and Sakura could work out. His physical eyes, which had technically been Itachi's, could not have come back with him. Yes, Sakura's seal was there, though depowered, but eyes? It seemed Naruto's seal had been a lot more complex than even Naruto had realized. Could it have sent them further back if his eyes and her seal hadn't come back too? He waited for Itachi to see the horrors Akatsuki would bring on the world. His own death and then resurrection with the Edo Tensei, fighting together against Kabuto. Sasuke's death and meeting the sage, Kaguya. The end of the war, the brief peace, and then the world ending. Edo Tensei being used again to bring back those powerful or smart enough to maybe find a solution. All the death until it was just the four of them. Then they're leaving. Itachi had not been one of those they had planned to bring back. Smart in a different way to what the Kages were looking for. But Orochimaru had claimed there had been a mix-up in the samples, something Sasuke hadn't believed. Despite the fact that Sasuke had killed him, the Sannin had seemed almost protective of him, which had been weird after the years planning to take his body. Was it cruel to make Itachi watch all of that? Maybe, but Sasuke wasn't doing it to be cruel. His brother was stubborn. All Uchiha were. He had to be shown that his way wasn't going to work. Akatsuki could not be allowed to get their hands on even one of the Biju. Itachi blinked and then stared at him. Itachi could do nothing as he watched events unfold. It was an illusion, he knew that, but how could Sasuke create one so detailed? Seeing his brother twisted by Orochimaru, his own death, and what it had driven Sasuke to, how could Sasuke know any of it? Seeing him with adult versions of his teammates, missing an arm and with a Rinnegan, time travel. It was insane, and yet, His mind spun with too much information even as he felt the technique end. He blinked, finding he was still in the tree, unharmed. Sasuke hadn't taken advantage of his complete vulnerability then. Sasuke's eyes remained the Mangekyo, or eternal, but then they faded to their natural darkness. Eyes too old for the body they were in and weren't quite the shade he remembered. As if they weren't Sasuke's eyes. But how could they be his when he definitely still had his own? Sasuke, he swallowed. He didn't know what to think, what to believe, and that was very rare for him. Do you understand? Sasuke asked softly. Time travel is impossible. Never underestimate an Uzumaki. His brother shrugged slightly, lips moving into the ghost of a smile. He took a step and Itachi stayed still, not sure what his brother was doing, almost flinching when a small hand touched his face. You're warm, Sasuke whispered, voice trembling. Why wouldn't he be warm? The last time Sasuke would remember touching him would have been when he was brought back from the dead. Did those bodies feel dead? And yet the illusion had shown Sasuke and Naruto touching him. That his death had been used to turn Sasuke against Konoha. That had never been what he wanted for his brother. Had he done the wrong thing? Not in killing the clan, but in how he tried to break their bond. So, it appeared he believed what he'd seen, no matter how insane it had been. If it was true, then Akatsuki had to be stopped as soon as possible. And the current real leader wasn't Madara but Obito. Itachi had some very vague memories of a boy, somewhat an outcast in the clan, and then the fallout of his death with Kakashi returning with a Sharingan. He'd learned a little more of him from Kakashi while part of his team, but he very rarely spoke of his dead teammate. He had been saved in the future, only to die in battle protecting Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto fought the urge to pace. Everything felt calm, so it had to be going well, right? Sakura leant against his side and he breathed in deeply, taking in her calming scent. He hated having to sit around and wait, but he also trusted Sasuke to do whatever he had to come back and hopefully with Itachi on their side. Sakura was itching to get a look at him, to finally work out what disease he had and hopefully cure him, or begin researching a cure. With Itachi on their side, things would be easier. He could be their eyes and ear in Akatsuki, since the Sandaime would surely never clear his name with how involved, even if only after the fact, he'd been. Sometimes he wished he could forget all of the bad or questionable things he learned and go back to when he thought of Sarutobi as the closest he had to family. And then he grinned as two familiar signatures headed for the compound. Itachi stared at the ceiling, not quite sure how he'd gotten where he was, lying on a futon in what had once been his bedroom, a genin leaning over him with green glowing hands. Kisame would think he was insane for letting a child work on him, but Sakura had been Tsunade's apprentice in the future, had surpassed her teacher even. If anyone could heal him, it would be her. And while he wasn't interested in being healed for himself, for Sasuke he would do it. Seeing it all, he understood why they hadn't gone to the Hokage. So many of his decisions had made things worse eventually. They had been the ones to kill Danzo, poison mimicking a heart attack. He hadn't known about all of the Sharingan the man held, only Shursui's. He still missed the older Uchiha. Things would have been better if he had been the one to live. Kakashi was relieved to find Sasuke back to his normal self. The nightmares must have passed and let him catch up on his sleep. That was good. The Chunin exams were coming up in a few months, and according to the normal rotation, they'd be in Konoha. It could be a good learning experience for them, though they might even pass. They had the bare minimum missions to be put forward, but it'd look better if they had more. And maybe some combat experience beyond sparring as well. All three looked at him, waiting, and he smirked beneath his mask. Feel up to another C rank? He asked, chuckling at their excitement. The timing was perfect. Of course, there was still no guarantee they'd be given the wave mission. There had been other C ranks available at the same time after all. But given the mission brief, Sakura thought they had a good chance. If Kakashi was thinking of entering them in the exams, then they needed actual combat experience, and bandits were a good place to start. Gaara watched everyone and everything, using his sand to spy. It was strange to have memory of a voice demanding blood in his head. But Shikaku was not his mother, and was now quiet, because of their new seal and what they had seen. The Ichibi had no desire to end up sealed in the statue to become part of the Jubi again, and Gaara didn't blame him for feeling that way. His siblings were wary of how he changed in such a short time, Kankuro more than Temari. She seemed happy to have him less murderous, reaching out, and he wanted to reach back, but it was hard knowing what to do. It was being kept very quiet, but he had managed to find talk of the upcoming Chunin exams in Konoha, and a meeting with Orochimaru. It would be good to see Naruto, but he would not be a weapon for Suna, not anymore. He was more than the biju he contained, even if his father refused to see it. No, if it came to a fight, then he would fight for Konoha and ensure his siblings were safe. If Kisame didn't know Itachi as well as he did, he wouldn't have noticed anything. But he did know his partner. They had bonded over their pasts with their villages. Something had changed while they had been apart, but Itachi hadn't said anything. He seemed lighter somehow, like a burden had been taken from him. But what could it be? Sarutobi looked over Team 7 as they stood before his desk. They had really come so far so quickly. Every time they left the village, they were in danger though, either enemies willing to take on the Kapinin, someone willing to risk facing him in order to grab the easiest Uchiha to target, or even someone who might realize Naruto's parentage. There were many out there who still carried grudges against the Uzumaki and Minato. But he could not keep them in the village forever. They were shinobi, and his replacement may not care much about protecting him. And so, he picked up the waiting C-rank mission scroll and handed it over. Their last C-rank was diplomatic, but now it was time for them to get some low-level combat experience. A few bandits would be a good test of their training and something Kakashi could easily deal with if the children got in over their heads. Wave. Naruto felt the urge to bounce in happiness as he moved around his room, packing his pack. Last time, this had been their first big mission, the real start of their ninja careers, the fights that had made them finally realize how dangerous their lives now were. This time, they had plans to deal with whatever happened. Gato would die and hopefully Zabuza and Haku would live. He wasn't nervous, not really. They were a lot better trained this time around after all. Sure, they didn't have the power and skills of their future selves, but they had been a lot worse last time they went to Wave. Yes, Naruto was personally as powerful, but he was still learning to deal with that power. Dealing with a water clone would be child's play if he didn't care about Kakashi-sensei seeing. But with the man there and watching? That would be harder. He grinned as arms wrapped around his waist, leaning back against Sasuke's taller form. He hoped he got a growth spurt soon. Then again, fitting against him was kind of nice. Sakura brought something up, Sasuke murmured. Yeah? He asked. There's that old shrine and priest in Wave, the one who wanted to marry the three of us first time around. It was obvious Sasuke was smirking as he reminded him, and Naruto froze as he remembered that crazy priest. Except maybe he wasn't so crazy? Had he somehow known the three of them would get together one day? The man had been old, really old, and his temple had been ignored by Gato since it had no money or anything and the man was harmless. Then again, he'd also tried to marry Kakashi off to Tsunami, so maybe he was nuts. But it didn't matter. As a priest he could perform legal marriages. They could marry without involving the bureaucracy of Konoha. Once it was done, then it was done. He grinned and spun to face Sasuke, pressing a chaste kiss to his lips. They were getting married. So, he grabbed a sealing scroll and dug out the most formal clothing he had, bought new since graduation, and then tossed the scroll to Sasuke so he could add his and get Sakura to add hers as well. They would get married in formal clothing to ensure it was proper. Kakashi knew his little terrors were up to something, but he had no clue what. Still, they seemed more happy than sneaky, so that was fine. So long as they got Tazuna safely home, it didn't matter. And of course, that was when things went wrong and he grimaced at spotting the genjutsu. C-ranks were not mean to involve other ninjas, so what had changed since Tazuna had left Wave? Or had he not been truthful on who was after him? He ready to leave and see how the kids handled it, only for Sasuke to absently toss two kunai into the puddle, the illusion shattering immediately as one of the demon brothers collapsed with a blade in his neck. The other blade had lodged in the other brother's arm. The less injured one was immediately enraged, lunging at Sasuke in retribution, only to take a sandaled foot to the face as Naruto kicked him, snapping his head back. Sakura had dropped back to guard Tazuna, kunai in hand, even as Naruto grabbed the brother's head and slammed it into his knee, the man collapsing from the two blows. Sasuke was checking the first, pulling his blade out, which let some blood flow but not a lot, so dead already. Sasuke stared at the body and then the blade before cleaning it off and returning it to his pouch, Naruto handing him the other one. One body and one live to interrogate. Sasuke looked at him, revealing spinning Tomo and red eyes. Sharingan. And then he looked to Naruto and Sakura, checking them over for injuries. Had it been a desire to protect them then that had awakened his eyes? Better than a negative emotion. Sakura lay in the tent beside Naruto, Sasuke on watch. So far so good, and without Naruto being poisoned, though would it have done anything at all to him now? A first kill was a good reason to give for awakening Sasuke's Sharingan. He was having to use an illusion though to hide the fact it was fully mature. He had the Mangekyo, but what about the Rinnegan? He still had the Sage's power after all, so technically he should still have it. Maybe he wasn't powerful enough yet, like with her seal? Tomorrow, they would face Zabuza and they had to let it play out so long as no one was in danger of dying. Then they would have the time while Kakashi recovered to secretly approach Zabuza with the truth about Gato. They needed to save them and send them on to join Mei in sorting out Kiri. One of the 7 swordsmen plus Haku's bloodline would be a good boost to her cause. The sooner that was fixed and Yagura freed, the better. That would take either Sasuke or Itachi though if they didn't want him dead, but there was no way Sasuke could go, and it is doubtful that Itachi could overpower what Obito had done. Sasuke has now made his official first kill and odds were they both would too if the final fight on the bridge happened. Naruto rolled over, tugging her closer. "Sleep," he mumbled, and she smiled, cuddling into him. Zabuza smirked as he stared down the 3 kids. This was going to be easy, but he did feel a little bad at killing 3 kids who had no clue what they were getting into. Konoha was too soft on their genin. He formed a water clone and sent it after them, giving the kids the chance to run for their lives. He wouldn't chase them if they did, and left the bridge builder to him. The 2 boys looked at each other and nodded, clones of the blonde appearing even as the dark-haired boys went red, Sharingan. And Uchiha, weren't they all dead? Still, it wouldn't be enough to save them.